And we are live. So, what is good, YouTube? And welcome back to the third episode of Catch and Counter with Jack and Nibs. I am Jack, and this is Mr. I Told You So. Nibs, he's been a good hot chick. So, Nibs, first of all, just how you feeling about this hot chick you've been going on? I think you're the only ITR member who went 2-0 last week. So, two big fights, two big wins. But how you feeling, especially the fact that you were able to pick them both right? Only guy, I think, on the whole staff.
I'm gonna knock on wood a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Because I've been wrong on a lot of cards sometimes. But nah, man, it feels good to know when you're right, bro. And especially about Bud. Like I know a lot of people, and I don't know why. A lot of people just blatantly disrespectful in some cases about Bud and his resume and what he could do. And it was like, growing up as Mayweather being the guy, I saw a lot of that in Bud, and I'm like, I don't know what people are tripping on, but this dude is next. Like, I don't see anybody beating him. Spence gave me pause because of what I saw him do to other welterweights. But when you start, when we were talking to James Toney, remember,
Mm-hmm.
we asked him, between Bud and this was over a year ago. He said Bud was gonna whoop Spence's ass. He told us. I thought he was tripping. But then I started going back and you start paying attention to the little things, and it's a, the man said what he said for a reason.
Yeah.
So, I paid attention to that in a way. I mean, it was one of those things where I had to start going back and really paying attention to what Inoue was doing. And then it was like, yeah, I don't know if Fulton got that, bro. I don't think. And then you go back and you start paying attention to what Fulton does, and we'll get into all that later. But hey, man, you know what? If I tell you to bet on something, put your money on it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't quote me on that because if you lose, I don't really want to.
Yeah. So you
But
guys.
I told Felix back, and he'll tell you this story is real, bro. When
Andy
Anthony
Ruiz,
Joshua,
right? Mm-hmm.
yep,
Yeah.
I told him, hey, bro, put any money you can on Andy Ruiz. I bet you he's gonna win this fight. I'm guaranteeing you're gonna get your money back. And he didn't believe me, and we saw how that went. The
Yeah.
first fight, not the second.
Yeah. He would have got his money back and then some too. He would have won. He would have been able to win some good money that day for sure.
He was Andy Ruiz was a plus 2,200
Yes.
dog.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I was telling people I had seen Andy Ruiz. I thought he had beaten Joseph Parker in their meeting, and I was telling people, I'm like, yo, Anthony Joshua is mid, bro. I'm trying to tell you, I think Andy Ruiz can beat him. Especially at this, with the odds he got. I said, if you had, $20, $100, any extra money you had, I was telling anybody who would listen, put it on Andy Ruiz.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody listened to me.
Yeah.
I'm
Well, at
just saying.
least after last week too, I'm sure they'll be listening now. So, like you said, you don't want them now. That you're on a hot streak. If you lose one, we don't want everyone coming for you now
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
no one's perfect. So that happens. But real quick, we'll just touch on the undercard, and then we'll in length kind of get into the main event. And thank you to everyone tuning in the chat. If you guys like the video, it helps us out a lot. And just leave any questions or anything you guys have about Terence Crawford's great performance last week. And like I said, we're going to get into that in a few seconds, but I just want to mention the undercard really quick. So we had Yoenis Tellez open up the undercard against Sergio Garcia. And we were on here talking just because Tellez had never fought an opponent who had a winning record before. And it was crazy. I hadn't seen a jump like this in a long time where you go from fighting guys with losing records and you fight a guy who's a top 10, top 15-ish kind of guy who's been in with top guys and been able to compete. We saw him blow him right out. So he got thrown in the deep waters, and we found out he could swim too. So I was just really, really impressed by him. I think he's going to be one of those guys who I didn't know much about before. I knew Ronnie Shields really liked him a lot, and Ronnie Shields is a guy who's been around for a long time. So I kind of gave him benefit of the doubt on that one. But I think I see not why Ronnie Shields was so high on this kid now. I think he does look really, really special, and I think that you will see him even on more of a fast track now because to me, he looked more ready in this fight. We saw Sergio Garcia fight Fundora. He won 4 or 5 rounds in that fight, and he was shut out by Tony Harrison after that, but we've never seen him blown out the way he was too. So what did you think about, because we were both kind of skeptical on this one about how this would go if it was too early for him, but he showed it was definitely not too early for him, and he got the job done in devastating fashion.
I mean, look, this was the dude that proved me wrong last week. Like, you know what I mean? Like, Tellez, I picked Garcia to get a decision, because based on what I had seen, I thought Tellez was going way too deep, way too fast for what I had seen of him. you know. So I didn't quite think he was ready. The boy completely changed my mind. I'm happily incorrect about the way, whether or not he was ready. He's ready. Now, do I think he should, start fighting, world champions next? No. I mean, I think but I don't think he should go backwards either, right? I think he's on that level now where if you're beating guys like Garcia, stay on that level, for a couple of fights before and then move, start moving up. They gambled and it worked out, man. They got a real one, and there's a lot of times where, guys, we're seeing it more now. Guys are 5, 10 fights into their career and take these massive jumps, in talent. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you run into a guy that, he's got some losses on his record, but they're all against top level dudes, and he puts it on your guy that's your blue chipper. But Tellez was ready for it, and there was really, I mean, Garcia had some moments, bro, but for real, Tellez put in that work. So I was thoroughly impressed. I didn't see anything where I was like, yeah, nah, I don't, he got lucky. It wasn't anything like that. He worked it out.
The crazy thing too is that he stepped into that fight on short notice too, because it was supposed to be Jesus
Right.
Ramos, and Jesus Ramos is someone we're really high on. It just shows because I think Jesus Ramos. I mean, he beat Mendoza comfortably, and we've seen what Mendoza's been able to do since then. So that's when it staged really well for him. But if Jesus came in and had the same performance, we would have been saying like, wow, Jesus is a real legit contender. And rightfully so, just because no one had ever done that to Sergio Garcia for. So for someone who's a prospect, and a lot of people looked at as not even like an advanced level prospect, like a young kind of green prospect, to be able to come in and do this was really, really impressive for sure.
He's a blue chipper prospect, right? He's the guy, you're picking to come out of high school and throwing him into the league, and expecting him to 360 windmill everybody. But I didn't know enough about him to know that that's what was coming in, and I'm surprised that he did it against a top level guy. Again, a lot of times you get these dudes that come in and they stink up the joint against these top level dudes, or sometimes it happens. You're just moving too fast, and that's okay too, because you can learn from that, right? I think it was the perfect outcome for him. He got enough rounds in to learn some things, right? Like, but you could see him making adjustments real time. That was the most impressive part. I was like, this dude he's picking this dude apart. Like, I don't know if anybody else was catching that. I'm pretty sure you did. You got you catch all that shit. But you could see him making adjustments in the ring, and that was impressive to me. And then I said, okay, and I don't want anybody going super crazy, but I kind of got David Morrell vibes. Like, this dude could be on that level in a couple of fights, bro. Like, he's got legitimate talent. We'll see what he does with somebody who can crack real hard. See if his chin holds up. But I like what I like from what I seen.
Yeah, I won't disagree with any of that. I think that just the jump in competition he was able to make, and the fact that he never seemed like unsure at the beginning or anything. Like I said, feeling up process a little bit, but you saw the wheels kind of turning in his head. You saw him kind of thinking through things, setting certain things up. We saw obviously in that third round, it kind of all came together and he was able to get it done. So I think the sky's the limit for him. There's a lot of fights at 154 and 160 with PBC he can match up with. So I think in a few fights, I think we can see him with any of those big name guys. So like I said, I don't want to
think about this, bro. Think about this. That was short notice, like you said. Imagine if he'd had a full camp for Garcia.
Yeah, exactly. So like I said, we don't want him to go. We're not going to say right now that we're going to throw him in with Tim Tszyu or anything like that, but we don't want to see a step back. Like, I mean, if he were just to throw a name out there, like I think if he were to fight like a Terrell Goucher or someone like that, I think that's a perfect kind of opponent for him. Still a guy that's very dangerous, a guy that, like, if you slip up, he could definitely still beat you, but kind of along that lines of a half step up probably from a Sergio Garcia, but not all the way to like that top 5 level yet. So I think that's the perfect kind of guy to put him in with.
Bro, I could see him in a couple of fights, maybe 2 more fights fighting a guy like Lubin, getting in there with a guy like him. Maybe not him specifically, but I could see him getting in there with a guy on Lubin's level, like a guy who's right there. We're super high on, could probably win a ship any day of the week or lose one, but a guy you respect, hella good power. I'd like to see him against a guy like that, but he's coming, bro. I think he's next.
Yeah, no, he is without a doubt. So, future's bright for him. I think we're going to see big fights for him going forward. So, a guy who could kind of float under the radar before to hardcores, he's definitely not flying under the radar no more. So, I think we're all going to be interested to see. And especially I want to see him back real soon. I want to see him get another fight in before the end of this year. I don't know if the Canelo Charlo undercard is set yet, but if it's not officially set, throw him on there as the opener. Even if it's only 2 months away, he'll clearly be ready. It's not like he took any punishment. So, I do want to see him continue to be active too.
Yeah, he came out super clean. So, yeah, that he should be able to jump right in.
Yeah, for sure. And then I got the main event wrong, as we know, which we'll talk about pretty soon. But I got the two underdog picks. I did get right, so I picked Tellez to win. And unfortunately, I wish I was wrong on this one, but I did have Alejandro Santiago. I thought he would edge Nonito Donaire, and I think to me it was a combination of Santiago looked the best I think he's ever looked. I think he's learned from some of the losses and the draws he had. He could have already been a world champion before he fought Jerwin and Cajas in a draw that could have went either way, a lot of people thought, but he looked really sharp. I think Nonito early on, it was like, oh, could he catch him with his power? Maybe. And a few times, but I think once Santiago got settled and started kind of pushing Nonito back and throwing his hands in the combinations, I think we just saw, just like I said, just a combination of Nonito being kind of a little more past it, I think, than we had seen recently, especially since the second Inoue fight. Now, Santiago just took advantage of the moment, so I do want to give him credit for that. A big win. He's now a world champion, but it sucks for Nonito. I know he said he wants to continue to fight on. If you want to have like one more homecoming fight in the year favorite in, I think I'd want to see that, but I don't want to see someone like him go on for too long either. But so what did you think about Santiago's performance, and then also what we want to see out of Nonito Donaire also?
I thought Nonito Donaire got old in the ring, bro. That's what it looked like.
Fast.
It looked like it looked like it was time to retire in the 6th round. With that being said, the first 4 rounds, I thought Nonito was Nonito. I thought he was doing everything we expected and loved to see out of Nonito, and I damn near thought he had a chance to end the fight. A couple of times actually. Like, he was sneaking him, but he was relying too much on the left hand. He wasn't setting it up like he usually does. He was telegraphing it later on, and then it became literally like that was his only hope, right? Like, let me land the left hand and get this guy out of here. Problem is your opponent knows it, and once Santiago got in there and got comfortable, found a groove, it was easy pickings for him. But he did have to weather a storm early on. So, to his credit, I don't want to take anything away from him. I don't want to say, oh, because he fought an old guy, he won. No, he fought a legend, and he came out unscathed, and got a belt. So, hats off to him. I think that, he's got a decent career ahead of him. Do I think he's going to be a world beater? Probably not. But I was impressed with what I saw, bro. He overcame an early storm and, got the dub.
Yeah, and there's not many other big guys left at 118, so I wouldn't be surprised if he does win a unification fight or two. Never going to be a pound-for-pound level guy per se, but I do think he could have a nice little run. And I do think that clearly if this was Nonito 5 or 10 years ago, then clearly Nonito would probably win that fight in hindsight. In hindsight, people are going to look back and say, oh, all he did was beat an old Nonito Donaire. Well, that old Nonito Donaire was also the favorite to beat him in this fight. So when we look at that, most people did expect Nonito to win. So I do think we want to be fair and give Santiago his credit. So because it's not like, I know the scorecards were kind of close, but to me, I didn't find the fight close at all. I think I scored it like 10-2 or something like that. Maybe 9-3. I'll try to find it, but it wasn't like it was a 7-5, a split decision that could have gone either way. Santiago showed a lot of separation too, without a doubt.
No, I had it 9-3, and you could have made a case for 8-4. Maybe there were a couple of close rounds, but even at that, even if you give Nonito a couple of extra rounds just for being Nonito, bro, it's still 8-4 at best. You know what I'm saying? I had it 9-3, and it wasn't close. You know what I mean? The rounds that Nonito won, clearly I gave him, but those were early on, and it was and then after that it was pretty much, if you want to throw him a bone, you can. But I thought Santiago clearly won even the close rounds. So I thought, I don't know, man. I don't. The thing about Nonito is, and I said this, and I picked Nonito because I said, hey, I learned my lesson about picking against the guy. Every time I thought, just like I think right now, it's time for him to hang it up. He has a performance where he comes back and he makes you go,
Hold
shit,
on a second. Yeah.
yeah. Wait a minute. What happened? You looked like you were done a fight ago, and you come back and you pull the fountain of youth out of your ass and beat a guy you have no business beating, right? So even now, I'm like, hey, if he wants to keep on fighting, I think he's earned it. All the wars he's given us, he's given us some great fights, bro. And it wasn't like he got put to sleep. It's not like he's thoroughly getting whitewashed here. He was in a competitive fight. Even though I thought he lost a lot of those rounds, they were competitive. So if he wants to continue fighting, I wouldn't be against it. I probably still won't pick against him. He's one of my favorites. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame, first ballot, I think, in my opinion. So there it is.
Yeah, like you said, at the end of the day, he lost on Saturday, but I mean, he won in his career overall. He's a Hall of Famer. I think the word term legend kind of gets thrown around a lot, and we'll talk about a guy in a little bit who stamped himself as another legit legend. But I mean, Nonito Donaire is a legit legend in the sport. He's a Hall of Fame kind of guy, one of those guys who will be looked at 40, 50 years from now. They'll look back on his career. And I just looked at my official scorecard because I wanted to find it, but kind of to your point, I gave Nonito rounds 2 and 3. So I had him up 2-1, but I gave Santiago every round after that. So it showed that. He showed early on, but I think after that, just like his legs aren't the same as they were, and the timing, it seemed like even if there were certain openings that he might have taken advantage of a few years ago, he just kind of wasn't able to pull that trigger. And a lot of that credit does have to go to Santiago too, because he never gave Nonito the opportunity to load up and catch him flush after that either.
One thing I want to point out, right, and I don't know if you watched the full fight. For those of you who watched the full fight and you got to see the interaction in the corners, Santiago's corner was active and they were giving him direction, right? I don't know what's going on with Nonito's corner. I know he loves his wife, but if he's going to keep fighting, that corner work has got to get better, bro. Like, they were barely saying anything to him. Like, and the stuff she was saying was more motivational as opposed to directional. It's like, he's Nonito Donaire. He doesn't need motivation. You know what I mean? He needs somebody in the ring he can respect that's telling him, hey, bro, you're fucking up. Let's do this, do that. And he wasn't getting that. And I know he's Nonito Donaire. He'll forget more boxing than you and I will ever know, kind of deals. But you need somebody in your corner that's going to tell you what it is. Even Floyd had to have Roger and his daddy in his corners, telling him some shit every now and again, and he listened, right? So I think that made a huge difference also, because you saw after that third and fourth round, Santiago's corner was getting in his ass. But they were calm and they were telling him, correctly, hey, you need to do this X, Y, and Z, and he executed the game plan, bro.
Yeah, because I think the best corner, each corner is different. Each fighter's relationship with their trainer is different, but I always like to see the perfect combination of some motivation, but also some technical things. So you might want to kind of get in there first right away, get him some water for 10 seconds. Don't really say much. Ask him how he's doing, how his legs feel, stuff like that. Then you can maybe get into, okay, you got to do this, this, and this. If he throws this, you want to slip this way, you want to do that, pivot this way, and then kind of hype him up at the end of the round. But that's the one thing, if I want to nitpick Nonito, I mean, he is a Hall of Fame and a legend, but sometimes he has struggled to kind of make adjustments in fights. And I think that, as you're saying, if you're lacking kind of someone else to have that extra set of eyes from that viewpoint, Nonito's seeing things, but Nonito's seeing it from, he's looking right at his opponent. The corner is seeing it from a whole different angle, so they're able to kind of have a different outlook on things. And like you said, his wife's a great lady. She's done a lot for him in his career, but I think if you did have somebody else in that corner, it maybe would have, not that he would have even won the fight, but maybe you could have made a few adjustments. And I mean, the cards were 7-5 and 8-4, so if he made a few adjustments and won a few more rounds, even if we didn't think he would have pulled it out, maybe he would have won the cards at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I mean, there was no sense of urgency in those championship rounds in his corner, right? Like, you didn't hear them telling him, hey, look, you need to do more. You've got to win these last couple of rounds if you have a chance, right? And to me, I think that's detrimental as well. Like sometimes you have to be honest with your fighter, bro. Like, sometimes you've got to tell them, hey, you know, you don't always have to tell them that they need a knockout so they get desperate, but you need to tell them, hey, we need to get busier. And I think, to be honest with you, I think if had no Nito have just been busier, right? Because there were some dead spots,
Mm-hmm.
right? If he had just been busier, he probably could have got a couple of those later rounds. And
Mm-hmm.
and like you said, maybe he swings a couple of those close joints, just throwing punches. Like he didn't have to land nothing serious. Just throw more punches. Who knows?
That's why it gets tough, and I think you can see that he has definitely aged too. Where even someone says clearly the power is always the last thing to go, so he still does have a lot of power. It's just his ability to not only because he's always been a good timing guy, but it's just he's that half step behind now. Where some of those shots that he used to catch guys flush with, the guys are kind of just able to slip or just able to get out of the way of now too. So it does make it harder. And like I said, if he had more activity, especially against a guy in Santiago who's not a huge puncher, he didn't have to be as worried about getting knocked out on the other end of it, so he maybe could have pressed. But obviously, it's easier
Right.
said than done because he's in the ring and we're not in the ring. But I think those are all fair observations. So before we get into the co-main event, we'll touch on that real quick because that was a kind of forgettable fight. But a few comments in here saying what happened to the fight. Will you guys, or what's happening to the fight? Will you guys stream it? So I think they're asking about the Jake Paul Nate Diaz fight. Unfortunately, any of those TV fights or pay-per-view fights, we are not allowed to stream. So we're here to kind of just preview the fight, and we'll talk about it a little bit at the end of the show, but we are not allowed to stream those fights, unfortunately. But our show on Fridays is always kind of a preview show, and then we recap what happened the week before, and then we also have a show on Mondays, which is the boxing shop, and they kind of set the stage for the week and also recap what happened after that. So those are the two shows. If you guys are new to our platform, that's kind of what we do. We wish we could stream these fights and talk along with it. Sometimes we do these like watch alongs where we will watch the fights ourselves and then talk about it. But unfortunately, due to monetization reasons and stuff like that, we are not allowed to stream the fights on our platforms. But thank y'all for asking those questions and tuning in and listening to us today.
Yeah, we ain't got that kind of budget yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we need to tell Felix to get on OnlyFans about that. You know what I mean?
exactly. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, we do what we can, but until we get that budget increased, buddy, this is what you got to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Yeah. We make it work. So the co-main event we had was Isaac Cruz against Gio Cabrera. A weird fight, and we were talking about Isaac Cruz a bit last week, and I was saying just that the Tank performance was good. I think he got a little too much credit for it. I just think that he got credit for it was a semi-close fight. I thought Tank still clearly won the fight, and he beat it. He lost to a guy who had one hand for 7 rounds, and he was getting outboxed by that guy with one hand, with just the lead hand too. Tank was just using his right hook and his jab, and he was able to kind of neutralize Cruz. So I'd said he was kind of a bit overrated. He's still a legit top 10 guy. I'm just not sure if he's a top 3, top 5 kind of lightweight, and I think we saw some of those same limitations in this fight. Gio Cabrera is a very awkward fighter. He's a tall guy. His chin seems like it's up in the air for him to get knocked out, but he showed a chin and a half too because he took a lot of those shots on Isaac Cruz. So I think it's a combination of Cruz. I think, is one of those guys who I think his power has kind of gotten overrated a bit. He's been able to knock out like smaller, older guys. Like he knocked out Gamboa. He knocked out Eduardo Rodriguez, but those guys are guys who were coming up from 126. So I think against these guys at 135, he's not as big of a one-punch power, but I think Gio also deserves a lot of credit for his chin and his toughness. So I thought the scorecards were way too close. I wasn't impressed with Isaac Cruz, but I still thought he clearly won the fight. I think I had it. Let me see right here. I had it 116, 111. So I had it, what's that, 9-3, 8-4, something like that. But so I thought the split decision was kind of crazy, but I still wasn't impressed overall. So what do you think, I guess, about Isaac Cruz, about Gio Cabrera, and about that fight as a whole, which we don't have to touch on much, but I think we'll just mention it real quick and then move on to whatever wants to talk about.
It was boring as fuck, is what it was. And to your point, I'll say this. As boring as that fight was, anybody who had Gio winning that fight needs to have their eyes checked, right? And I can't really respect what you're saying about boxing. Pitbull won the fight. And he won the fight fair and square, right? But I've never seen somebody get so much credit for a loss than he has. He's he's gotten more respect and love and pub off of a loss than I don't, maybe shit, Marvin Hagler. Like, I mean, come on, bro. Like, this dude took a L, and let's put that into context, right? He was a late replacement for Tank, so Tank didn't have time to prepare for him, and then Tank hurt his hand. We all know the story, and it was a legitimate injury. It wasn't like, he was faking it. He legitimately hurts his best, his power hand,
Yeah,
and still outboxes this.
hurt it so bad that he didn't load up on it for the last 6 rounds. Not like, oh, he was using it. Like, he legitimately didn't use it the whole back half.
Right. And he's got medical records to prove and showed, yeah, this was a legitimate. He wasn't just faking it. But that aside, Isak did perform well. He had his moments. He gave Tank hell, right? Let's be real clear. In a fight where Tank has time to prepare for this fight and he's 100% healthy, he whitewashes Pitbull Cruz. You know what I mean? That being said, though, I still think Pitbull can beat a lot of these other guys. Has he done anything really for me to deserve a rematch with Tank? Hell no. I will say this, though. I think it's an impressive win on his resume because, Gio was a guy, he beat the brakes off a guy we're really high off, Gabe Flores Jr., who's, kind of, like a family member to the show. We really appreciate him. He beat the brakes off a dude, had his most impressive win. He was undefeated, but I think maybe it was just too much too soon for him. Because let's face it, there are levels to this game. Isak Cruz, I think, is just a level or two above where Gio is at this point in his career. I think maybe the young man will learn some things, and he did get to learn that he can go rounds with the guys on the level. So like you said, he took everything Pitbull had to throw at him. We'll see what happens, but I wasn't impressed with either guy. I don't think this. I think this might even have hurt Pitbull a little bit in his quest to get one of these bigger fights, or maybe it did have the the effect that they wanted. He looked vulnerable, had a snoozer against a guy most people expected him to roll up, right? So, maybe somebody will take the fight thinking, oh, Pitbull's easy work. And that's one thing he's not. He's not going to be easy work for anybody. But, so maybe we'll see what happens. But I'm not clamoring to see Pitbull again anytime soon.
Yeah. Shout out to Joshua Cabrera too. They're Gio Cabrera's brother in the chat. So salute to you. And I do want to say just that Gio did. He had a big time performance. He stepped up, and like Nip said, those rounds will do him a lot going forward. They'll be able to look back at the tape, and I think he will come back. He's already a very, very good fighter, but I think he will come back even a better fighter. Oh, yeah. And I'm very excited to see what happens with him going forward. So he said Gio threw 775 punches against Pitbull, 300 more punches than Tank did. Gio bolts back and focused on more quality punches. Tank only landed 30 more punches on Pitbull than Gio did. I thought Gio did a lot of good work early in the fight. I thought when he was active, I think he frustrated Pitbull a lot. He had Pitbull chasing a lot. Pitbull wasn't really cutting off the ring. And I said it earlier, Josh, I don't know if you heard it, but I want to give your brother a ton of credit for the chin that he has too. But he took some flush shots in that fight, but it was never a time where I was like, okay, this is about to be over. Every time it seemed like he was buzzed really good. He always came back. He got back to his game plan. So I think that discipline will help him out a lot going forward too. And for Pitbull, this is Pitbull's first on his resume. This is going to be a very, very very good win that I think will age pretty well too. It's his first win against a legit in his prime lightweight. Like he's got Gamboa on his resume. He's got Francisco Vargas, Diego Magdaleno, Eduardo Ramirez. Those guys are all smaller guys moving up or just guys who are more past their prime. So I think it was good to see where Isak stood against a legit 135 guy, I think, who's going to be around and in the game for a long time. So I think that for Pitbull, his stock is kind of, like you said, probably in the same spot where it was before. But I think for Gio, especially now having this tape that he has, I think it'll both serve him really well going forward too. So shout out to you, Josh, and thank you for tuning in for us, also giving us some fun facts.
And I don't want to say this just because his brother's in the comments. I want to say this legitimately. He's got the wild card gym behind him, right? He's got, probably arguably one of the better trainers, period, ever in Roach. I think in 5 years we'll be saying more about Gio than we are about Pitbull. You know what I mean? I think it's comfortable to say maybe 3 years, not even 5. I think in a couple of years we're going to be talking more about Gio than we are Pitbull. I think Pitbull is he is what he is, and I think he's going to be that, right? He's going to be a really good opponent for a lot of world champions. He's going to be in some really good scraps, but he's never going to be more than that in my opinion, right? I think Gio's got the chance if he learns from this, goes back to the lab, you know, gets more active. I think that dude's got a legit chance to put some straps around his waist.
Yep. And the good thing is, like you said, we're not, I mean, we do appreciate Josh being here, but we've been high on, we were talking about Gio last week before he was even in here. So all these things are things that we would say anyways. I do think that there are a lot of big fights for him still over if he does stay with PBC and get some fights over there. I know like Michelle Rivera, who lost to Frank Martin last year, he'll be looking for another opponent. Like there are a lot of guys around, Chris Colbert or Ryo. There's a lot of fun fights that I think Gio will be in. I think win, lose, or try, he'll continue to get those big fights if he continues to perform the way he did last weekend.
Hey man, if he can get back to the guy who put it on Flores' ass, yo, sign me up for that shit because that shit was amazing right there. But look, I think that plus you from Chi-Town, baby, I got to roll with him. It is what it is. But I've been giving him praise since the Flores fight, and I think that was for me. I expected more because of that, right? I expected to see him take another step. I expected him to kind of put on a show a little bit, and I didn't get that. You know what I mean? So I'm disappointed in that, and to be honest with you, I'm disappointed more in Pitbull because this was your platform, bro. This was your chance. You've been, selling wolf tickets for years since you lost the Tank. This was your chance to put on a show. You weren't the star of the show, but you were right there. You know what I mean? And he underperformed. So, look, man, it was to me it was an underwhelming fight. Especially considering what we got in the main event, bro. Like that was, I mean, hell. And Felix, you in there in the comments, bro? Where them shots at?
Mm-hmm. I was just gonna say, so that's a perfect kind of segue to the main event. Before that, I'll just say, Felix saying Gio's a star. Felix was obviously there at the presser, saying he was the most entertaining man on the stage. And he always says that these fighters need to learn how to cut a promo, and Gio has that part down already too. And I think just the experience of being on a big card like this and being able to be in there in the ring, he looked good early on. I think all those things will help him going forward. I think the future is very bright for him. And Felix said, "LOL, shot soon." Now, does soon mean soon today or soon on Monday? I think it's to be determined, but soon at some point. I think Felix will be able to get you on that.
I mean, he said that Monday when I came on, the other guy's show.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying.
Yep. So we shall see on that. You guys are gonna have to stay tuned for when Felix kind of gives Nibs what he's been asking for. So Nibs, there we go. And so I guess in August for sure. I mean, I was hoping that. I figured that was already assumed, but I guess you're gonna get it this month.
And you know what? Here's the thing: if I'd have lost, he'd have been expecting them shots on air.
Right away.
Monday. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, half my bottle be gone right now if I was fucking with Felix.
Yeah, so he doesn't give you your shots and he doesn't give you your shirts yet. So I guess we got two things we got to work on with him on that one. So.
Right now. Hey, but you know what? Shout out to Felix for being there live, being our man on the scene. He got a lot of great content. Everybody go check out, the itrboxing.com and then also our page on OnlyFans, man. Felix was there and got a lot of great content. So I'll give him credit for that.
And y'all just heard it here first. On Monday, he will be taking the shots. So you guys know the Boxing Shop show they have on Monday.
I don't want to hear that shit. Right. Felix, you said this Monday you was going to get me Friday. Now you're telling me Friday you're going to get – okay, all right, bro. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see if it becomes – we'll see if it becomes next Friday after this now. But like I said, in August for sure. So now let's get into what the people really came here for. You guys can tell by the title. But I just want to start this by saying I'm someone who's always been a big sports fan. I'm only 23 years old, so I'm young. I've been watching sports since probably about 2007, 2008, but really remembered things from probably like 2010, 2011 on is when I've been able to really just kind of think about and really understand what's going on in front of me. So I've seen the LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, some of the baseball players, Shohei Ohtani that we see now. I'm not as much into baseball, but we've seen great athletes and great guys of the modern generation. But I don't think I've been impressed more by one athlete on one night than I was Bud last week. I think I'd pick Spence to win. I'd pick Spence to win in a close competitive fight. You would pick Bud to win. I was even seeing why a lot of people could pick Bud to win, but I don't think any of us ever thought it would go the way it went. I thought that he was just one step ahead the whole time. We always talked about, oh, Spence's jab, Spence being the bigger guy. Ended up being Bud's jab and Bud's power that ended up being the difference. So I was just, we'll get into it a lot. I could talk about it. It's funny because I almost have no words for the performance, but then I could also talk about it all day. It's kind of in between. It's like I don't know what to say, but then I feel like I could go on all day about it. So what were your thoughts about just watching, I guess just like it says in the title, just a modern day legend be born right in front of our eyes?
I want to give this some context, right? We watched a masterful performance on Tuesday morning when we watched Inoue and Fulton, right? We watched Inoue completely dismantle one of the best boxers in our sport, period, right? The man prior to Tuesday night at 122, there was nobody we thought was even close or in his league where it was even going to come close to sniffing a win against him. Here comes this guy, this monster, and he says, I got you. He puts on a what at the time was considered the best pound for pound performance I had ever seen, right? He completely took everything away that this master boxer can do, shut him down, and then knocked him out late, right? And it was, I said, there's really nothing I can see from Bud and Spence that's going to change my mind. This guy's number one, because he's moving up all these weight classes and he's demolishing the man at each one of those weight classes. This dude he's it. Terence Bud Crawford then said, hold my motherfucking beer. I mean, he gets in there and, Bud has moved up weight classes. He gets in there against the guy who everybody thought was the man. He's got 3 of the 4 belts. He's bullying everybody he's fought up to this point, and a lot of people thought there was really nobody that was going to fuck with Spence at 147, including Bud. Bud comes in there and just completely demolishes him from the get. There was no question who was going to win this fight from round 1 on. I know some people gave Spence round 1 as kind of, the gimme round to the champ. Okay. I'll give you that one, But after that, I mean, Bud Dog, but I did say this. I said outside of one of these 2 guys dog walking the other, there's, Inoue's number 1. Well, Bud dog walked the shit out of Spence, and now he's number 1. And I want to tell you, if you don't have Inoue or Bud as your number 1 pound for pound fighter, if they're not 1 and 2, I can't respect anything you say about boxing right now. I just can't. These two dudes are 1 and 2 pound for pound. I don't give a fuck about Showtime and being able to put butts in seats, and they might not be the most bankable, right? But they're the best fighters, boxers, whatever you want to call them, in the sport right now. Bud Crawford, I don't think, after what we saw Saturday, I don't think there's anybody that can beat him at 147, period, point blank right now. And outside of maybe Mayweather in his prime, I don't think there's anybody at 147 that could beat him, period, in that division, the way he handled Spence.
Yeah, it was just a dynamite performance. And like you said, I think they're clearly number 1 and 2 pound for pound. And when is the last time we saw a gap this big between whoever is number 2 and number 3 pound for pound, too? The gap between 2 and 3 is bigger than the gap probably between 3 and 15. Like, it is just crazy how those two, and we have so many great fighters in the sport. There's probably about 17 or 18 guys when I try to look at a top 10 pound for pound that all deserve to have an argument to be on a top 10 pound for pound list. But that gap after 1 and 2, I think is a bigger gap. Floyd and Manny, when they were in their primes, but there were still other guys who were, like you had the Shane Mosleys or some of those other guys who are still around and closer enough, I think, than these guys are with But in a way, whether it's an Usyk #3, a Jermell Charlo, a Bivol, some people like to throw Canelo still around. Whoever it is you have at #3, they're light years still behind, I think, those top two guys at this point.
Here's the thing, right? There's nobody in either one of these guys' weight classes, in or around it, that is going. Like we had this conversation after the Inoue fight. The way he beat Fulton, because there was nobody we thought could beat Fulton at 122.
Mm-hmm.
There's damn sure not anybody at 122 that can beat Inoue, right? You'd be hard pressed to convince me somebody at 126 can beat him, right? They might give him a few problems.
Yeah, I thought Robesi has an interesting fight I want to see because he's got a bit more pop, but I'd still favor Inoue in that fight for sure.
Right, you're favoring him in any fight, right?
And that's the Robesi, #1 guy in that weight class. So that shows
right, and Robesi could give him some problems maybe, right? But you're going to expect Inoue to win. To be honest with you, if he goes up to 130, he might have some problems there. You know what I mean? Like that's what we're talking about. This dude was fighting at 118 a year ago. You know what I mean? Now we're saying he probably won't get a test until he gets to 130. That's how good this dude is. That's ridiculous, bro. You looking at Bud. Bud was fighting at 140 a handful of years ago. Maybe he's got to go up to 154, maybe 160. Shit. Before somebody could really put them paws on him, or there's a guy out there we haven't heard of yet. You know what I mean? Like that's what it is, bro. I think, and the thing is if both of those guys, if Inoue and Bud decided to retire right now tomorrow, they'd be first ballot Hall of Famers.
Yeah, for sure. Without a doubt. And I even think that the two guys that they beat, Fulton and Spence, depending on how their careers go, shows how impressive those wins are. If those guys go on to have great second acts in their careers, those guys could both still end up in the Hall of Fame too. And it shows the difference between those guys are still, we talked about, these fights weren't fights to determine great fighters. They are fights between great fighters to determine an all-time great fighter. I think we're able to see clearly the two all-time great fighters that we saw. Real quick, so Joshua Cabrera was saying a few minutes ago, thanks for watching my bros fight. Gio missed 2 weeks from camp from a cut he got from a headbutt from Haney. Then a week before the fight, he got wisdom teeth pulled. Very proud of my little brother. Your body health is a part of the game. That right there is a fact, 100%. A lot of people don't realize that there's more things that go on. It's not a video game. These guys don't just show up at 100% every single time. And I give Gio a ton of credit too, because getting a wisdom teeth pulled out, I haven't had it, but I know a lot of people who have had it, and it's something that is very annoying. It's nagging. So if you're having it done the week before a fight, as you're doing your weight cut, as you're finishing your training and all those things, I give him a ton of credit, because a lot of guys would have probably looked to pull out of a fight like that. So I give him, like we said, even if Josh wasn't in our chat and talking with us, we would still give Gio all the credit in the world. But Josh, I do want to thank you for kind of sharing some of these things with us, because it kind of helps us relay the message out to people too, and just show that Gio is one of these warriors, and he's just a definition of a guy who will fight, I think, anybody at any given time, no matter the circumstances, as you can see by that comment right there.
And I don't want anybody to sit up here and think that, you know, his brother is trying to give him excuses, right? Mm-hmm. These aren't excuses. This is boxing. That's the sport of boxing. This is the stuff you don't see. It's why I've kind of given Charlo the grace that I have. I know a lot of people won't, but I said, you know what? He's going through some real life shit, right? Mm-hmm. And you hear reports of him being drunk all the time, doing this, that, and the third. He's dealing with stuff that, look, we've all been in relationships. I've been married before. When you're dealing with that, it's really hard to deal with anything else. Mm-hmm. And we're asking our athletes, our, entertainers, to give us that, right? Forget about you being human and having to go through human, regular, everyday shit, just like Gio. I don't know if you've ever had a tooth pull or tooth pain. That's just the worst. You know what I mean? So, but I don't want people thinking his brother's in here giving him excuses. He still manned up. He got into the ring. He put on a performance, right? He took an L. He can bounce back. But that's insight that a lot of people don't even consider. You have to remember that the guys in that ring on Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights, or in Inoue's case, Tuesday nights, is they're human, right? They have human shit to deal with. A lot of people are giving Spence that built-in excuse that he had those accidents that he's had to deal with, and high-speed accidents to boot. Like he wasn't in any just fender benders. Like Spence was fucking himself up, bro, in those accidents. Does that weigh into it? Yeah, but he's human. You feel me? But he still decided to man up, got into the ring, and did what he could do.
Yeah, for sure. So Marcus Barnes, thank you for leaving a comment here. It says, "Are y'all showing the fight or no?" Probably talk about the Jake Paul Nate Diaz fight for tomorrow. Like we said it a bit earlier, but due to monetization and stuff like that, we're not allowed to show these fights on the screen. We use our platform to kind of preview fights and then we recap fights after that. So you guys can, if you guys want any insight before and after fight, you guys can come to us for that. But to be able to watch the fight, you guys are gonna have to go through the actual providers to be able to watch the fights. And then I knew this was coming at some point, so my dad right here saying so the Pops Kelly, as Nibs calls him, in quotes, said Nibs tried to tell you, meaning me, that Bud would win, although he thought it would be a lot closer. So he's been having his victory lap. I told him rightfully so. You guys got me on that one for sure, so I'll give you guys that. And
Pops, what's happening, baby?
And then Ray's calling Cap on. He says he's calling Cap saying on Nibs saying he's been in a relationship. So we got that. So and I don't know where that came from. That was shots have been fired by Ray, but as if you guys don't know, Ray is on the Monday show, so you guys can tune in and watch the Boxing Shop on Monday also.
Disrespect.
Yeah,
shots to your point, right? I just pulled it up. Here's what ESPN has as their pound for pound, right? They've got Bud at number 1, Inoue at number 2. I'm not going to argue with that. I don't think any of us. You can argue the position of them at 1 and 2, but the fact that they're at 1 and 2, nobody's arguing. Here's what we got as the rest of the list. I don't necessarily agree with the order, but this is what they got. They got Usyk at number 3, Canelo at 4, Bivol at 5, Fury at 6, Beterbiev at 7, Haney at 8, Shakur at 9, and Tank at 10. So if you're I will give Usyk this. He's gone up from, he's gone up a weight class, in at heavyweight. For me, it's really hard to have a heavyweight in my top 5 because, if there was 2v1, I guess Usyk, Fury or Usyk would be the guy. But until he fights Fury, bro, I just can't put him above either one of these two guys. But even at that, as good as I think Usyk is, and I think he is, he's got an extreme amount of talent, right? I respect the dude. He's levels below either one of those two. If you took Bud or Inoue and put them in a heavyweight's body, they smoke anybody in the heavyweight division right now, including Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's why the pound for pound debate is so hard for those bigger guys. Someone like Usyk, who I probably would have in that number 3 spot, but even with him, the cruiserweight run, he showed that he is the best cruiserweight of this generation. So I give him a lot of credit for that. But a lot of people do like to shit on Anthony Joshua. I think Joshua's he was overrated. I think he's become a bit underrated now. And people can give him all the shit that they want, say he's a hype job, this and that. But that second fight with Usyk was pretty close still. So at the end of the day, it depends on. I do think Usyk is he was a smaller guy moving up. So I think as much as Usyk gets credit for that, it all depends on how. I don't think you can't have it both ways. I think that I don't think he's the world beater or what he was built up to be once upon a time either. But I think that he has to be given. It's either he's not great at all and just that win doesn't mean much, or he is an underrated fighter and that win's pretty good. I think people like to kind of have it both ways. But I do think that clearly 1 and 2 are clear. I think after that, I would kind of rearrange some guys in that list. But I think that top 10 right there is about probably what most people's top 10 would be. Like you said, from 3 to like 10 or 15, you can kind of interchange those guys. But I have no problem. There's not one guy on that list where I'm like, oh, that guy doesn't deserve to be on there or anything like that.
No, I mean, they all deserve to be in the conversation, right? But let's face it, pound for pound is Inoue and Bud at this point. And There's no one else you can include for me into that conversation. The conversation, like you said, is 3 through 15. Where do these guys fit in the top 10? Right? That's the conversation to be had. There's no conversation. You can't argue with me the top two spots, right? You can argue with me the order, maybe, which one deserves to be one, which one deserves to be two, but you can't argue that either one of them should not be one or two. I'll say that. And to your point with Anthony Joshua, my thing is this, bro. After becoming the unified champion, yeah, he got his belt back against Ruiz, but let's face it, Ruiz was on the I just won the biggest fight of my career tour.
Hell yeah.
Got super fucking fat. And let's be honest, if Ruiz had trained properly or been on his shit, he probably beats Joshua again, bro. I mean, even though he lost that second fight, there was always that thing in the back of your mind. He could probably still win this fight, the whole fight. Like, he could still get it. Outside of respect, he bounced back, got his belts back. After, the Klitschko fight, really, what has he done, bro? Like, you know what I mean? Of his opponents, who do you respect so much, right? Like, White.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it. White gets smoked by any of the other guys in the top of the division, right?
And he's gotten smoked by those guys too.
Thank you. So who's on his resume where you're going, oh shit, his 3 losses were clear losses. They weren't like, I mean, he was more like to your point, he was more competitive in the second Usyk fight than the first one, but he clearly lost. He was whitewashed in the first one, and he got smoked by Andy Ruiz in his loss to Andy Ruiz. And again, if Andy Ruiz hadn't got on the Fat and Happy tour, he probably takes another L there. He's marketable, so that's why people love him. He gets people's asses in the seats, bro. You could put Anthony Joshua against me in a heavyweight fight, and he'd probably sell out an arena overseas.
Yeah, and that's why the pound for pound gets interesting, because I do give Usyk credit for that win, but it's funny because a lot of the same people who say, "Oh, AJ sucks, AJ's a hype job, AJ would lose to this guy or that guy," then have Usyk #1 pound for pound for what he did against JJ. And I'm like, oh, you kind of can't have it both ways. So I think it's kind of a little bit in between. I think both guys, it's neither extreme, it's somewhere in the middle. But I do think that's why the pound for pound debate is all. It just comes down to everyone's opinion. But I do think, like you said, everyone's opinion is clear that it's not even an opinion. I think it's just a fact about who #1 and 2 are. Ray brought up a good point too. Yeah, that's the one guy actually who was missing from that list. I don't know what the hell Jermell Charlo has to do. Well, I guess I know what he's going to do is just win his next fight. But for him to get on that top 10 pound for pound list for ESPN. So I know he's got beef with some people at ESPN. I know Coppinger is probably doing whatever he can to keep him off the list because he called him out before. But that's how it goes. And he's got a big chance. If he's able to beat Canelo, I think I'd probably slide him up to that #3 spot. And if Canelo wins, so I think the winner of that fight, if they were able to win that fight cleanly, or especially Charlo moving up in weight, I think could reassert themselves as that #3 guy. And then the race that AJ still ran that whole fight against an out-of-shape Ruiz. And I was happy to see him get his get back in that fight, but he most definitely did stay on the outside and stay on his toes and kind of stick that jab out there for sure for all 12 rounds.
Exactly. So, but here, to the first point with Charlo, I think no matter what the outcome of the fight is, depending on his performance alone, right? Because let's face it, he's moving up from 154 to 168. That's not a little jump. If he were moving up to 160, I'd probably have this fight a little bit closer, right? But moving up to 168, especially when you've been fighting at 154 your whole career, like it's not like he's flirted with 160. You know what I mean? Had some really good success and then go back to 154. He's been in 154 the whole time. Canelo's fought at 175 a couple of times, to varying success, but he looked comfortable at 175. You know what I mean? And even though he's not the tallest fighter, he looks comfortable at the bigger weights, right? Like he's probably cutting decent to get down to 168. I do think Charlo can make the weight, but again, I think if he puts on a performance, like if that fight ends up being like a knockdown, drag out, all out war, and he loses a split decision, I think you got to put him on the pound for pound list either way. Now, if he gets in there and gets smoked, well then there it is.
Yeah, I mean, shit. I think we'd both have him. I already have him. I think number 5 on my list. I think he's already
Yeah,
shown that he's a proven pound for pound guy. It's funny that Ray mentioned this because I kind of want to get into some of these backstories behind Errol Spence too. But he says if Canelo comes in high and gets stopped like EJ, is Charlo number 1? If Jermell were to do to Canelo what we just saw Crawford and Inoue do to Fulton and Spence, he probably would be number 1. Just Canelo, I think, even more than those other guys, has been able to prove his chin and his durability. If Mel was ever able to move up and do him like that, I think he would be number 1 pound for pound. But clearly, it's easier said than done. I do think that fight is a competitive fight. I think that one misconception is, though, that people look at it and say, oh, well, Charlo's the bigger guy. He's the taller guy and the longer guy, but he's not the bigger guy. I think people kind of get confused by that sometimes. And then they also say, oh, well, he walks around at like 170. So like he'll be able to be 165, 168 in the ring. He definitely will be, and he'll be strong in the ring, but he's never been hit by a legit 168 pounder before. So that's what the difference is will he be able to carry the weight? Probably. Will he be a bit more sluggish than he was at 154? Probably. He's still taller and longer, but he's never been hit by a guy at 168. So I think just that's all I want to see from the fight. Is if he's able to weather the storm and the power of Canelo. I didn't think could be able to outwork him, but I think we're gonna have to see how that one plays out.
Ray needs to let it go.
Mm-hmm.
Ray needs to let it go, bro. Look, man, Spence, no matter, and I will say this though, I did say when they were doing the interview before the actual fight, I was like, why does Spence look high?
Mm-hmm.
But let it go, bro. He got in the ring, got his ass whipped. If Charlo beats him, no matter what the circumstances are, you have to. I wouldn't put him number 1, but I'd put him in the conversation. Right?
I think he slides into that 3 spot, right? He's in that conversation with those other 2 guys for sure. Yeah.
Right. But you have to take into consideration this dude is undisputed and he got it the right way. He was the man who beat the man, right?
Knocked out every champion. Knocked them all out. Yeah.
He's beaten everybody he's faced. The one loss that he has, he got that back in spectacular fashion, right? So you look at it that way. I think that if he does do what Bud did to Spence, then you can argue it. But I still think Bud is number 1. You could argue putting him at 3, Inoue at 2. You can argue the order in which that would happen, but he'd be in the conversation. I don't think you take Inoue or Bud out of the top 2 for that though. I think one of those is still got to be there, but Charlo can make a shitload of not just money but history if he does that to Canelo, which I don't see him happen. I think Canelo is, I don't think he'll get knocked out, but it'll be an entertaining fight.
Yeah,
if he were going to be knocked out, though, now this time in his career would be the time to do it.
Mm-hmm. Like you said, it is just for Jamel. He behaves like champions do. We've seen a lot of champions behaving like champions recently too. Knocked out every champion along the way. 1 loss and 1 draw. He knocked them both out in the rematches, and now he's moving up 2 weight classes to fight who? Oh, the undisputed champion at 168 in the face of boxing. Like he's not just moving up to take a tune up or anything.
Right.
He's moving up 2 weight classes to fight the face of boxing and the undisputed champion in that weight class, who most people had number 1 pound for pound just a year ago, 2 years ago. So all the credit in the world to Jermell. But going back to the Spence and Crawford fight really quick too, just want to talk a bit about where we think Errol Spence kind of goes from here now, because to take a loss, he's had the car crashes before. He had the 2 car crashes. He had the detached retina, which back in the day, that was basically a death sentence in your career. With modern technology, people are able to come back from those things now. Sugar Ray Leonard, we saw, took 4 or 5 years off, and he was able to come back from it. We've even advanced that much since then, but he just looked 1 step behind Bud the whole time they were in the ring. You saw him early on. He was using that jab. He was trying to set up like that looping left hand over the guard of Bud, but all Bud would do, but kind of like the name of our show, what Bud would do is he would catch it and he would counter it with his right hook every single time, basically. So Do you think that it was, and I think it's kind of a combination of both these things. Is it just that Bud was that much better than Spence the whole time? Or was it a combination of just Bud having the best night of his career, Spence maybe just having the worst night of his career, maybe the weight cut for Spence, the inactivity, the just he said it, he mentioned his timing was off. And this isn't us making any excuses because Bud won at the end of the day. He's the number one pound for pound guy. But I'm just still trying to wrap my head around just the performance we saw because I didn't think that even if I thought Bud would win, I didn't think Spence would look as slow and sluggish and just not on the same level as we saw, not even close to the same level. So do you read anything into that? Is it more Spence? Is it more Bud? Or do you think it's like me and it's kind of just somewhere in the middle?
Man, before I respond to that, I want to give Spence some credit.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, with everything you just said, everything we've been saying throughout the podcast and what everybody else will say, Spence could have had built-in excuses. He could have came in, listed them off, right? X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3. He came in there and said, look, I'm a grown-ass man. I took this fight. I stepped in that ring and I lost. Period. He said, even if I had an excuse, I wouldn't give it to you.
That's what I love. That was some good shit right there. That's some real shit too. Real shit right there.
He's standing on his business, and I love it. And for that and that alone, I will forever be a fan of Spence, right? Because he stood on his shit. Hey, I got in the ring and I took an L, period. Let's move on. To answer your question directly, 154. He's got to go to 154. He should have been at 154 2 fights ago. What I will say this though is he needs to take some time off. Whatever his next move is as far as fights are concerned, and I'm not just saying this because he got his ass whooped on Saturday. I'm saying this because you've had not one, but two devastating car crashes, right? Like, I don't know if you've seen the vehicles that were involved in those accidents, but if I showed you those vehicles and said the person who was inside of them lived, you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
So he was in not one but two devastating car crashes. That and even he said he's got anxiety when he's in a car, because of how devastating those car crashes was. That affects you, bro. I don't care who you are. That affects you. Roy Jones said it best. He was like, look, you can't tell me he's the same fighter after what he's been through. He's got to hit the reset button. He's got to take some time off, get his shit back together, and figure it out. But whatever it is, I hope it's at 154. 147 is in his rearview mirror at this point. He's got to move on and go up. And I think, to be honest with you, I think depending on what happens with Charlo and Canelo, I think 154 would be prime for him to kind of take over a little bit. I think Bud might stick around at 147 for a couple of extra fights. But if Bud moves up, then, maybe we can have a rematch later on down the line with them both at 154. Who knows? But I think whatever it is, whatever he's going to do, you should be, I hope he takes the appropriate time to heal, seek the help of professionals with that healing. Just don't sit at home and hope it all works out and then move up, man.
Yeah, the one thing Spence showed us, he does have the heart of a champion. Even the punishment he took, that's a fight that could have been stopped, I think, a few rounds before. I think, let's be real, once we got to round 7 and he was knocked down twice and knocked down at the end of that round, that fight was a wrap. It was a wrap even before that, too, but I think at that point it was just how much more damage they're going to potentially let happen to Spence for the rest of his career and his life. So I was happy that the referee stepped in when he did step in. Disappointing a bit in Derek James as someone who I've sung the praises of for a long time. I still think he is a fantastic trainer, but didn't really have an adjustment there for Spence. I understand once you're in there, it's easy for me to say, oh, you didn't really have an adjustment, but never really had anything else to go to. Never really showed any, I do think the fight probably should have been stopped before. And I was having this conversation with my dad when we were watching the fight. I think probably around 6 or 7 right before the knockdowns, the other ones too, just saying that I understand the magnitude of this fight. I understand it's Errol Spence Jr. But at what point do you consider stopping this fight because it wasn't going his way at all? And I think we saw that it probably went on a little too far. You got to the point where Spence did get to go out on his shield, so there wasn't any, early stoppage or this and that. But I do think it was tough, and you probably could have stopped it a little earlier. As far as what he does next, I think that he's talked about he wants the rematch in December. I think that's way too soon. I think you got to take off a lot. I think even if you go to 154, I think you still need more time off. I don't think coming back, and I think if you come back, I think Bud will win the rematch probably regardless. But I think if you come back in December, I think that Bud would definitely win the rematch. You want to, I think, even if it's contractually supposed to happen next, it's probably a better idea for both those guys to move up and get fights. If Bud's going to move up, he can use his WBO super mandatory status, whatever the hell they call it, to fight Tim Tszyu. Let's say if he fights Tim Tszyu and Spence fights Mendoza and they both win, then it could be a unification, something like that. I think Spence I want to see him get his feet wet, get a victory back in there, see how he looks in the win. And then go from there, because I do think that it sucks to even say this, but it's hard to say after a performance like that if Spence will ever be the same guy that he was. Never mind with the accidents, but even just from the Ugas fight too, because you saw he took a lot of punishment not beating Ronaldo. But it was a long, drawn-out beating he took last weekend too.
Let's put it this way, bro. And I say this all the time, right? Stop falling in love with the shit you do well. Fall in love with the shit that you don't do well so that you can become a complete fighter. Errol Spence has been able to beat everybody else because he does this one thing really great. He's a pressure fighter. He can do a handful of things really well, right? But what happens when you get in there with a guy who does everything great? You know what I mean? When you get in there with a guy who's not only a boxer, but hits really fucking hard, right? And can knock you out. And he's proven that. It's not like this is new. It's not like he put on this performance and we had never seen him knock somebody out before, right? He's been knocking out guys, left, right, and center. He's got what is this, 31, and he's 40 fights and 31 knockouts.
10 or 11 in a row, I think, too, in all championship fights.
Right. So what happens when you fight those guys? And at 154, there are a lot of guys who can do that, right? There's a lot of guys who can box and bang. You have to fall in love with the shit you don't do well so that when you're faced with somebody who can neutralize what you do well, you have a plan B or something to fall back on. Okay, well, now I can switch and do this, right? Floyd Mayweather was the king at that shit. There's really nothing you could stop him from doing. But, he was the king at being able to take whatever it is you do well and make it obsolete. Bud did that on a whole nother level against Spence. Not only did he make what he does well obsolete, he then, proceeded to beat his ass. You know what I mean? And you kind of felt like Bud could have ended that fight anytime he wanted to.
Yeah, he was in complete.
To your point,
control.
I think Spence definitely has some things to fix.
Yeah, shout out to this comment too. I think we both agree, but said nobody at 54 beats Crawford, not a soul. I might go a step further. I don't know if anybody at 160 beats him either. I don't. I think just a 160 would be the perfect division. There's no one really there. It seems crazy that it would be a Roberto Duran type thing where Bud started at lightweight. Like he fought Gamboa once upon a time. And now we're talking about him fighting at 154 and 160. Carlos Adames is a really, really good fighter. Yeah. But I'd favor Bud to beat him. I think that, Munguia is at 168 now, but some of those other guys, like a Janabek is a good fighter. I'd pick Bud to beat him. That's when I think, we're talking like I've even seen conversations where people are now even asking about Canelo and Bud, which seems crazy, and even we can see it coming in. Not even I think so. That's facts, honestly. Yeah, not even I think so. He would beat those guys. I'll say that. So he would beat all those guys at 154. He'd beat all those guys at 160, I believe, too, in my humble opinion. And I think that it just shows his greatness, like we talked about with Inoue, that we're even talking about for a guy who started at 135, that I'm saying he would beat everybody at 160. And I think just that shows just how special that dude is.
Not including Charlo, because he's going through his shit. The top guys at 160, Triple G, who hasn't fought in God knows when.
He's retired.
Yeah. Janabek, Adamus, Liam Smith, and Arislandi Lara. Those are your top 5, this according to ESPN, right? None of those guys put fear in the Bud Crawford's heart. I'm pretty sure. You could pretty much line them back to back up, and he's got 5 more wins and a couple more straps. Even if if you take Triple G out of there, Chris Eubank Jr. is 6th. Chris Eubank got shit for Bud. Come on, bro. Like there's, stylistically, maybe Lara gives them the most problems, but it's easy work.
Yeah, more Lara 5 years ago. Whatever. I think Lara at this point, he's way more stationary than he was before. But even that just shows Lara's still a legit middleweight world champion, and we're saying we would pick Bud to beat him. Another comment too. So he's thinking along the same lines we are too. We said this. We had talked about this last week that Inoue would have to move up to 130 to lose, and even then he doesn't know. Which I agree. I mean, we said I thought Rabasi would be an interesting fight. I'd pick him to win, even against a Valdez and Navarrete. I mean, Inoue's got a good shot against those guys too. I think you'd have to go to 135 to certainly say, which that's too far at that point. But that's the first weight class you would say, okay, he would have real trouble. He wouldn't be able to beat a Tank Davis. He wouldn't be able to beat a Shakur Stevenson, nor should he even be in the conversation to beat those guys. It just shows how great he is, and that shows like you said, how special these guys are, and that the definition of pound for pound when you're moving up all these weight classes to try to find a way to get you guys beat. So he said, what fight outside of Charlo and Spence rematch is there for Bud right now? The obvious answer would be Boots. I know he was on the Breakfast Club saying that he's looking more for the bigger money fights. I think Bud's going to move up to 154 also. So the fight that I think is most likely to happen next is Tim Tszyu. As soon as Jermell and Canelo step in the ring, Jermell is going to be stripped of the WBO title, and then Tim Tszyu is going to be upgraded to full champion. Bud, then, now being the undisputed champion, has the WBO super mandatory status, which he's had. That's why he got the Jeff Horn shot. Also, in the WBO, if you're their super champion, you can move up and become mandatory in the next weight class. So what Bud could then do is move up to 154, and he could challenge Tim Tszyu for the WBO title. So I think that's a very realistic option. He's got one more fight on Showtime for now, and I think that would be one. Is there any other fight that you'd want to see for Bud out there besides? I mean, there's a bunch of names at 154, but I think that's the most realistic one that we see out there. And then thank you, salute to you. Said thank you all for going live. Thank you for tuning in and giving us these comments, because it definitely helps the show flow. So we definitely appreciate you for sure, bro.
Yeah, appreciate you for tuning in. To answer the question, whatever the fuck he wants to do is the answer, right? What would I like to see him do as a fan? Move up and fight Tszyu. Move up and fight a Lubin. Move up and fight any of the dudes with a strap, 154. As soon as, Charlo comes back, maybe, make that happen. I don't look, and I said this before, Boots would be food for Bud at this point, right? He probably have a better chance against Spence considering the circumstances, but Boots is not ready for Bud, bro, on any level at this point in his career, especially if you paid attention to his last 2 fights. Bud is not going to be a stationary target, and we saw what a guy who can box did. I mean, yeah, he won every round. He won the fight clearly. But the guy who gave him the most problems was the guy running around, sticking and moving, right? Bud's going to do that, and he's going to put them paws on you. So with that being said, I don't think Boots is ready. Would I be mad at him for taking it? No, because people are going to pay them to watch that. I wouldn't be mad at him for taking a Thurman fight because people will pay to watch that. If he moved up and fought a Danny Garcia kind of guy, because those are names, people are going to pay to see that. So, again, the real answer is whatever the fuck he wants to do. As a fan, obviously, we want to see him in title fights going forward. We want to see him in legacy-defining fights going forward. But he's earned the right to do whatever the fuck he wants to at this point.
Yep. So they asked also about what about Thurman. I know Thurman called out Bud in a respectful way, just saying, great. He also had a really cool message for Errol Spence that I really like. Just a lot of the pros I think have shown, which we said a lot of the same things, but it's easy to kind of kick a guy when he's down. But even Bud said to Spence, listen, this fight ain't happening without you. So just appreciate you and thank you. We appreciate you too for saying everyone hit the like button. That helps us out a lot. It helps us grow this channel. And maybe later on, we've had some people asking, maybe we will be able to stream fights if we get enough people hitting the like button. We get some more money thrown in. So you never know. So we appreciate that. But for Thurman, I think the perfect fight would be if you could see him in boots now. I think the landscape is kind of cleared out. Maybe that's for a vacant title. But I also do know this was a rumor before. I think more people have talked about it, so I can say it now. I've heard about it for a while. But I think you will see Keith Thurman and Ugas at 154 later on this year. That's a fight I know that's been talked about a lot. At first, it was like kind of there were whispers about it, so I didn't want to say it, but more people have mentioned it now. So I think Thurman and Ugas are going to fight at 154 later on this year is the rumor. And then I think Thurman could look for a fight at 147 after that, but he's looking at 154, I think, first for now. It says also because Tim is only a big money fight in Australia, he feels. I think Tim's name is, I think the Harrison win, I think did a bit more for Tim coming over here. I do think that especially if Tim is the champion, maybe Bud's not one of those guys. Clearly, I don't think Bud would give a shit at all about going to Australia. He's not one of those guys who I don't think would care as long as they pay him as long as they pay him what he's worth, which I'm sure they would. Tim would be the champion in that situation. So I could see that fight maybe being in Australia. Let's see what we got here. The moment Errol steps in the ring after the Neuralink implant activation, it will be like a symphony of speed and precision, leaving his opponents bewildered and audiences utterly spellbound. All right, how many more of these we got? Let's see. Errol Spence's reflexes will be lightning fast. Strategic maneuvers will be next level genius, as if he had a boxing team of masterminds guiding his every move. Fasten your seatbelt because this is not just a comeback. It's a mind-blowing, jaw-dropping, edge-of-your-seat experience you won't want to miss. Man down, like and subscribe. Appreciate you for the like and subscribe. And I sure hope as hell that you are right, honestly. I hope to God that everything you said happens because I am a huge Errol Spence fan. And I admit, it was as happy as I was to just see a dynamite performance and watch someone as great as Bud do what he did. I couldn't really enjoy it as much in the moment just because I wanted to see both guys live up to expectations. And man, it was tough to see Errol Spence kind of go out that way. But I hope everything that you said right there in this little these few comments comes out to be true. So if it does come out to be true, I'll give you credit for it first for sure. So we appreciate the like.
I want to say this. I want to say this real quick, bro. Healthy Errol Spence. There's really not many people I'm picking to beat him, bro, that aren't named Bud Crawford. A healthy Errol Spence has as good a chance to beat anybody at one. I mean, I don't think there's really anybody at 147 that I'd pick against other than Bud. And at 154. At 154, there are some interesting fights for him. But, my money would be on him most nights. So we're not talking about a trash guy. We're not talking about a guy who's done. We're not talking about, he's a bum or, this, that, and the third. He had an off night against one of the best fighters, and not only did he have an off night, but he was fighting arguably the best guy in the sport. Mm-hmm. So, if you lose to the best guy in the sport, nobody's going to give you shit about that, bro. There have been plenty of dudes who've lost to Canelo and had, good careers after. There's guys who fought Floyd and had, good wins after, became champions after. Or, guys that take L's and keep winning. I mean, you look at Miguel Cotto. Miguel Cotto took some L's. Guess what? He bounced back, won some ships, bro. Like, don't think that this is the end for Errol Spence. I doubt it highly. I think he's going to bounce back, and he's going to definitely get a couple more straps before he calls it a day.
Yeah, if Spence wasn't a great fighter, if he was just some guy who was decent, he wouldn't have beat Chris Algieri, Kell Brook, Lamont Peterson, Mikey Garcia, Sean Porter, Danny Garcia, and Ugas. Like, you don't beat those guys if you're just a solid fighter who just comes forward. There's more elements to his game, I do think, with these comments. So salute to you from watching from the LANL Isotope Production Facility. 2 theoretical physicists enjoying your channel. Appreciate you, bro. Thank you for tuning in for sure. And we're here live every Friday night. So if you want to kind of keep up to date with us, we'll be here live 9 Eastern time on Friday. So you're welcome.
We got the guys from Big Bang Theory checking with us. Check us out.
We do for sure. Then we have another comment saying, what can Spence do differently? This is why I have a hard time with the rematch too. I think that like these guys saying, they always say if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So what he's done has worked up until this point. But you also really can't teach an old dog new tricks. We talked about it with Deontay Wilder before. They've added some dimensions to his game. I think for Spence, he is what he is. What he is still a great fighter, and his style will continue to beat a lot of great guys. We're just a guy whose counterpunching is as sharp as Bud's is. Maybe at 154, he's a bit stronger. Errol's able to keep his balance more. And I guess just maybe if Errol doesn't overextend as much, but if he's not overextending, that means he's not pushing the pace, and then he's sitting back, and Bud's probably picking him apart even more. So it is hard. I'm not sure really as much what Bud could do more of. I think that it's just a tough style match. I mean, what Spence could do more of, I think it's just a tough style matchup for him at the end of the day, and Bud's just the better guy. Doesn't mean Spence is going to have a great career and potentially end up in the Hall of Fame himself once upon a time either, though.
There's nothing he's going to be able to do different against Bud, bro.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be honest. Let's stop bullshitting. Against Bud, nothing. He can. I don't give a fuck. He could get. Look, he can get Muhammad Ali's trainers. He can get, he could bring back, all the greatest of all time. He can get Floyd in his camp right now to help him out, right? Bud's got his number. I don't think there's really anything he can do against Bud. But, do I think I still think there are some things he needs to tweak. I'm not saying he needs to completely change his game plan because it's been working for him, right? There are some things he needs to tweak a little bit. Get a little bit better at this, get a little bit better at that, tighten that up, take some time off, and then he could be damn near unstoppable at 154, unless he rematches with Bud. So there's that.
Yeah, another comment here saying you can't picture him fighting at mid-range the whole fight. That's why it's so tough, because I think whenever people watch the fight, they're saying, oh, well, he's overextending, he's giving Bud, he's allowing Bud to land the counters. Well, if he, like we're seeing in the comment here, if he takes a step back and kind of tries to fight from range, Bud is the guy. Bud has the longer reach. Shot for shot, Bud will be able to land the sharper counter punches. So I do think that Errol's recipe for success is what he tried. It's to kind of use the double jab to set up some of those looping shots and to try to outwork Bud. The problem is that is able to set him up for the counter shot. So I do think, like I said, just a bit of a style matchup for him. I think that no matter what he does, he could make it a more competitive fight. But I think at the end of the day that, and if he were to win, if he proves me wrong, it would be a hell of a story, and it would be a hell of a trilogy that we would have. But unfortunately, I don't think we're going to see that. I think that Bud's got his number.
I think that I don't want to say that, it's impossible, but it's very improbable that Bud loses to Spence. And it doesn't matter what weight class it is. And I want people to also understand, if you watch boxing, you're not just a casual fan. If you watch boxing, pay attention. Spence gets hit. He's not unhittable, right? He's there to be had. He just hasn't been had. You know what I mean? He's been able to walk through what everybody else before Bud was able to throw at him, right? He was just that much bigger, better, stronger than everybody else. Again, when you run into somebody who's on your level or above, you've got to make adjustments. It's like, when Tank goes out there and fights a guy that's on his level, he's not going to keep doing the same shit he's been doing to everybody else. He's going to get knocked out, you know what I mean? Or made to look like a fool. I guarantee you'll see a different version of, Shakur against Haney or Tank, than you would anybody else, because they're on the same level. That's one thing you have to pay attention to in this sport. When your level's above your normal competition, then you run into somebody that's even if they're on the same level, like if you guys are on the same level, but you haven't made any adjustments because you're going to keep doing the same shit you did, against those guys that are beneath you, then you're going to get made to look stupid. You have to make those adjustments when you're on that level with somebody, or they're going to do what Bud did, bro.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think that it'd be interesting to see where both guys go from here. It was great to see that this fight actually did happen. We talked about it for a long time. It is now behind us. It almost still doesn't seem like it did happen. It's weird with some of these big fights where I still go back, I look at the highlights, and I'm like, wow, like we actually saw this happen. So it is definitely crazy. So let's see who's coming here. Why are people talking about Inoue versus Tank after Inoue won? Also, Crawford versus Tank after he won. Trust channels are talking about it. People are definitely talking about it. I think that people talk about a lot of stuff. The only reason we didn't bring it up as a real fight, we just used it as it, which I know he's not saying it about us, but we use it as an example to show that's how far Inoue would have to go to have a fight where people would say, okay, no, he's in trouble in that fight. Crawford and Tank, I think that's a crazy fight too. I know it's funny because Steven Espinoza was saying, who I do respect Steven Espinoza. He's the head of Showtime. He gets a lot of shit from people, but I think he's great for the sport. He's made a lot of big fights and he's a great ambassador for the sport. He had said about Tank and Inoue, saying, oh, he's at 122. It's only 13 more pounds to fight Tank. It's like, well, it's only 12 more pounds for Tank to fight Bud. But 12 pounds or 13 pounds, that's a lot in this sport. So I know he was just kind of saying, oh, like they're closer in weight. But 12 or 13 pounds is a lot. So as you're saying here, a lot of people are talking about it. Here, we don't put much stock into it because I don't think we're ever going to see either of those matchups. But without a doubt, especially the more kind of casual channels and stuff like that, those are big names out there. So if you don't know many guys in the lower weight classes, if they see people talk about Inoue, they think of, okay, maybe the only other guy they know in those smaller weight classes is a Tank Davis, and they know Tank hits hard. So like, okay, both these guys are small guys. They both hit hard. I want to see them against each other. And I don't think that they understand how much even they see, 12 pounds or 13 pounds, and they don't realize that's 3 more weight classes and would be Inoue's eighth weight class. So basically, as you're saying here, they'd want to see another dead body. So I guess that's kind of, if you're going to see any of those fights, I think that it would be very, very ugly, and we're not going to see it.
I take that as like, it reminds me, my son Chandler, he's a huge fan of trains. I mentioned this before. Mm-hmm. He loves trains, right? He, watches Thomas train all the damn time, drives me fucking nuts. But, even Chandler knows that, if you take 2 trains, just because they're both trains, doesn't mean that, if you ram them into each other, one isn't going to get demolished, right? You take an old school steam engine, you put it up against those locomotives they got out there on the track now. Yeah, technically they're both trains, but guess which one's getting fucked up? You know what I mean? And so that's the way that's how ridiculous it sounds to me when I hear people say, oh, well, they're both small guys, let Tank fight, the other small guy. And it's like, again, we just said this. Inoue was fighting at 118 a year ago.
Yeah, started at 108 too, I think. Right. 108 or 112.
So now you want him to move up against a guy who's, barely making 135 as it is. Could probably fight at 140. Maybe one day be at 147. A weight Inoue will never even sniff. You know what I mean? And put them in there with them just because they're smaller fighters. Get out of here, bro. That's
yeah. Read these last few comments and then we'll briefly, and I mean very briefly, touch on the Jake Paul and Nate Diaz. I guess just clown show, circus, whatever we kind of want to call it. But PBC is going to be extra careful going forward with Tank. He's saying just the Golden Children, Wilder, Thurman, and Spence all lost. I think with Tank, I do think that there's fair points there. I think with Tank, it might be a little different. He's more kind of in that Canelo range, where I think that if Tank were to take a loss or two, as long as it's to the top guys and he's competitive, I think he's such a big star, a bigger star. Those guys are all stars. Even Spencer's a big star. I think Tank has reached that many more people. There are a lot of boxing or fans of Tank who aren't boxing fans. They're Gervonta Davis fans. I know even I work in a program with kids and just middle school kids and stuff like that, and none of them, they have no idea who a Spencer or Crawford is. They don't know who a Deontay Wilder or Keith Thurman are. They don't know who a Benavidez is, but they know who Tank Davis is. So I didn't think his reach goes so much further. So I think someone like him might be a little different. I think the matchmaking points are very fair because there are a lot of – I'm a big Tank fan, but that also means I got to be honest and say I want to see some of these fights that we've talked about. I want to see him. I don't want to see him fight Isaac Cruz again. I don't want to see him, God forbid, fight a Chris Colbert. I want to see him fight these bigger name guys. So I do think that a little different with him just because if he loses a fight to a Shakur, if he loses 8-4, 7-5 to Shakur, I don't think that hurts him as much. And I do think that he's one of those guys who win, lose, or draw would continue to get those big fights. And we appreciate you, bro. No, we love all you guys being in the comments because you've added to the show and made it even better too. So salute to you and thank you very much for the support, bro.
Yo, Tank got Madonna. I have to watch boxing, bro. That's all you need to know about how
Mm-hmm.
big time is. But Madonna don't go nowhere,
Mm-mm.
publicly. Basically, she came to see Tank though.
She came to see Tank fight Rolly. Think about that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And when you take that into consideration, they might want to be protective of him, but I don't think you have to be,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like at 135, and I'm probably in the minority here. I'm picking Tank to beat Shakur,
So am I, honestly, too. And
right?
yeah, like you said, I think Shakur would be the favorite. Probably 70% of people would pick Shakur, but that's where we'll get into it a whole nother time. We could have a whole debate on that alone, but that's the kind of fight where I think Tank's boxing skills get very, very underrated with his timing to it. I think people would kind of be surprised that a lot of people think that's easy work for Shakur. And even if Shakur wins, that ain't going to be easy work. I can promise you that.
Bro, I'm telling you right now, if Tank were to move up to 140, I don't see anybody beating him there either.
Mm.
If I'm being
I
100,
think I
and
think
140's
Tiafimo's a
got
great
some
yeah.
killers.
I think Tiafimo's a great fight because they're similar to
Oh
each
yeah,
other. They're both explosive guys. They kind of fight in they're different fighters, but they fight in the same way. They use their athleticism. They use their explosiveness, and they both have great timing and punch placement. But I think that, like you said, that's another guy who's a smaller guy moving up, and we're considering him with these guys at 135 and 140. So I think he's a live dog, even if he's the underdog with that power and with his underrated boxing skills. He's a live dog against anybody at 135 or
imagine the
140.
box office with Tank, and Teal.
Mm-hmm.
Like imagine the amount of people the amount of asses you can get in seats. Like you'd have to put that on at like Dallas Stadium or some shit, bro.
Mm-hmm.
Like there'd be, you'd have to turn people away. and
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
the shit would sell out like that.
Yeah, the
The
press
pay-per-view numbers
conference,
would
the
be
think about
ridiculous.
the weigh-ins, there'd be people everywhere at the weigh-ins. Like it would be a hell of an event. I do think that's a Floyd talked about it before. I do think that's a fight that we do see at some point too. It would only make sense. Tank has fought, they've tapped in, he's fought a lot of Hispanic opponents. So I mean, Tiafimo would fit perfectly with that too. It's a promotional tool that Floyd's used a lot in his career too, and Tank's kind of built off that too. Perfect fight. I would love to see that at some point. I know Teal's got some things he's dealing with first. I know Tank's still at 135, but I would not be against seeing that fight without a doubt at some point. I do think we do see it eventually.
Yeah, bro. And to be honest with you, let's say, uh, you know, Haney's got a big test. I think people
Mm-hmm.
kind of overlook Regis, which is ridiculous. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
why you do that.
Wild.
I know, I know he's had a couple of off performances, but that's still a bad man.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say Haney gets past Regis, just for you know argument's sake.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a really good. I think Tank would be licking his chops to take a Devin Haney fight.
Mm-hmm.
At 140 would that would put him even further on the map. But I do think it is crazy, right? None of the guys at 135 are really pounding on Gervonta Tank Davis's door.
Mm-hmm.
Shakur says he can beat him, but you see he's bypassing him. He wants Haney, or now he
Mm-hmm.
wants Lomachenko. Wait a minute. What about, y'all forgetting you got Tank? Nobody wants that smoke with Tank, bro.
Yeah. And as a Tank fan, those are all great points, but it's kind of both sides where those guys aren't knocking on his door, but I wish he was a bit more vocal about wanting those other guys also. Even I think when he was on with Gillian Wallow before, they were asking him just like, oh, like, have you ever went up to Floyd and those guys and say, I want this guy, I want that guy, like I want Lomachenko, I want Shakur, and he's like, no, I take whatever I get, and that's kind of as what I'm getting right here. The guy saying, I don't know though, does Tank want to smoke? And that comment kind of caught me off guard when he was like, no, I never really asked about it. I kind of just kind of go with the flow. I do think since he wanted the Ryan fight really bad, I think he's starting to take over more control of his career. Tank's always been one of those guys that we love. I mean, we talk about these fantasy matchups with him. I want to see these matchups. I want to see him fight Tio. I want to see him fight Shakur. I want to see it because we have high hopes of him, and we would, unlike most people, pick him over all those guys. And we want to see him fight all those guys and not, like I mentioned before, not fight a Chris Colbert, which I do think is next. I know he's coming out of he was in prison for a bit, so I know they want a comeback fight, but I think you could do a little better than Chris Colbert for that one, honestly, which we've talked about before. We don't have to get too much into that, but I mean, I don't know about that.
Chris Colbert would be food for Tank. That
Mm-hmm.
like I seriously think that somebody might press charges against Tank.
Tank could have they could have made that fight. They could have released Tank from prison, walked him into the ring, and he would have won that fight
I mean,
easily. I mean, like, without a doubt, he would have. But probably the same way he would win anyways. So like, I don't see any demand. I know Colbert's from that area.
Disrespect to Chris Colbert. That's no disrespect, because my man got off the canvas in his last fight when I thought he was smoked. I thought it was a wrap against Ryle, and he came back to win his fight. He's Chris Colbert is a dude. I'll give him that. I was never that big on top of him before. I'm still kind of not, but at 135 against Tank, his career would damn near be over. I think if he fought Tank Davis, he'd be doing it strictly to get some money. But at what risk, bro? And whoever would put him in that fight on his team should be fired if they make that. And it's a fight. No, I don't think any of us want to fucking watch it.
And these are two good comments we have. This is the fight I've been advocating for Tank. If Tank's going to fight a PBC in-house guy, I don't want to see the Isaac Cruz rematch. I'd want to see him fight Frank Martin. I think that's a different style. And I think that Martin didn't look great in his last fight. So people would as long as you're not fighting the top guys, people are always going to kind of pick apart your opponents. But I would be okay with that fight. Even it's funny because another fight that I want is I would love to see Frank Martin fight Edwin De Los Santos. But if you're going to put Tank with De Los Santos, I don't know if De Los Santos is a big enough name per se, but I was really impressed with his last performance. And I mean, shoot, he's probably earned the rematch. He's earned a Tank fight more than Cruz has the rematch. So I'd be fine with either one of those guys. I'm not sure if they will happen, but the Frank Martin fight is the fight that I would want to see. And if they do, if all the titles do get vacated, if Devin does move up, Tank would become WBA full champion. And I believe Frank Martin is the number 1 or number 2 contender. So I do think that we could see that be Tank's first WBA super, whatever, real championship fight. It could be against Frank Martin. And that's what I'd hope at least. And I think I second this comment right here too. Yeah, and I second this comment right here too. And we're talking, obviously, isn't that great on, we're not saying that he's a scrub or we beat him, anything like that. We're talking about on the highest of levels. I think he's very, very beatable. I think that we've talked about that before, but I just want to kind of touch on that. So,
yeah, I mean, as a fan, I'd love to see, the Frank Martin fight. I don't think Frank Martin's got a big enough name. You know what I mean? I think at this point, if you're Tank, right, you want big names, right? Let's face it, he was levels above both Rolly and, Garcia. I mean, Ryan Garcia is nowhere near Tank's level, and we saw that when they fought, right? Considering, even when you consider all the natural talents the boy has, they're not on the same level. Rolly has really good power, and that's about as much as good as you can say about that.
And he's awkward, and he's awkward,
right? Yeah. But those guys have really big followings, right? So you're gonna sell a lot when you fight guys like that. So I think he's either fighting other guys like that, and let's face it, Frank Martin is not on that level yet either, whether it be talent or followings, right? You want guys who are either going to, put a lot of money in your pocket, or guys that are going to get you a shitload of respect. And all due respect to Frank Martin, I don't think he's on that level yet. But fighting a guy like Shakur, his first fight back, I wouldn't advise that either. I think he needs to get a good name. Maybe that's why the Cruz fight would be the option, because people are like, okay, well, we know that this dude's been on, he's been gaining some traction, right or wrong, right? People are starting to follow him even more. But, I think he needs a big name or a respectable name in any fight he has, whether it's a tune-up or, he's going in for championship fights at this point because of who he is, right? Like, it's the Floyd Mayweather effect, bro. We don't want to see you fight some guy we got to Google. Most casual fans have to Google. We want to see you fight a guy that's a guy.
Yeah, we see a few more comments here. We'll move on and we'll briefly touch on our last topic real quick. But talking about Isaac Cruz, doesn't even have a jab, can't go backwards or without leaping, only throws 3s and 4s. I think the combination of all he throws is really wide punches. He is pretty defensively responsible because he kind of just sits in that high guard and he kind of does walk you down a bit. But I think that's predictable and that can be timed also. And then we saw with Gio, when he's facing a mover, he doesn't really cut the ring off. He kind of just follows guys around too. Then the combination of it, if you throw only wide punches, you can't fight backwards and you can't cut the ring off. Anybody who can throw straight punches and move around, I think can give you problems. And I think we'll see guys give Isak Cruz problems with that going forward too. Did his gym mate spar with Rolly? Who's your gym mate then? Is your gym mate, is that an amateur guy? Is it a pro guy? But that's pretty dope. That's pretty good work to get in too, regardless of who it is. I think that's pretty damn cool. So
I mean, hell, maybe take Rose up and gets another belt at 140 and knocks Rolly out again. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. No, and it's all good. Even with these shows, we kind of we flow. We have an idea of what we want to talk about, but we kind of flow with the audience, whatever. Because we're here for y'all at the end of the day. So if y'all want to hear us talk about something, we'll talk about it. So if you guys are in here leaving the comments, we'll kind of get off topic. There's no worries about that. So we always.
Hey, if you're talking about boxing, you on topic.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. As long, like you said, if the topic is boxing, so you're on it. So now we'll go to something that is kind of boxing, kind of, like I said, half boxing, half circus. We'll touch on this real quick before we get out of here, since it is in the title and we've had people asking about it. Jake Paul, Nate Diaz. More importantly, let's get into this first, the real boxing, the undercard. We got Amanda Serrano had the Hardy rematch. We have Shadasia Green on the undercard. Ashton Silva, who's another Jake Paul prospect, is on the undercard. So what are your thoughts on just Jake Paul? Kind of, we talked about before, but just how much of a fan of Jake Paul, the promoter, are you, and the fact that he's using the spotlight to kind of give all these young fighters, or even these women's fighters who haven't got the shine they deserve, to giving them these big time opportunities?
Jake Paul, the promoter, is great because let's be clear. Amanda Serrano owes a great deal of her current success to Jake Paul, right? Here's what I want people to use, the context we want to put this in. Amanda Serrano is a champion in 7, not 1, but 7 different weight classes. She's 42-2, right? And I bet most of you didn't know who she, even your most diehard boxing fans didn't know who she was 5 years ago, right? We're talking about a person who's won a belt, a legitimate belt, in 7 different weight classes. There are men who haven't done that, right? That get paid millions of dollars. So when you look at it that way, he's doing great things for the women's division of boxing. Shadasia Green is another one of those big names that, again, probably if she's not on this undercard, people don't know who she is, right? Which is a shame because she has got a shitload of talent. I love everything I've seen from her recently. I fully expect her to put on a show on the undercard. Serrano Hardy too. I didn't need to see it, but I like it because I'm a fan of Heather Hardy. I think most of us are. Anybody who's known her story, you're pretty much a fan of her. Whether you think she's going to win this fight or not, I don't. I think it's probably going to be worse than the first one because Serrano is just not, because I believe Serrano's just, I think Serrano's been fighting more bigger, better talent than Hardy has, obviously, and you learn and you get better from that. So I think Serrano's going to take it all the way. To me, that's the main event. I know the main event technically is Jake Paul and his circus of a fight. But to me, that's the main event. You know what I mean? And I think they've earned it. And I think when he puts his promoter hat on, he's putting a lot of these guys to school. Like, if you look at some of these promotions that have been around for a while, he knows how to put on a show, bro. He knows how to sell tickets, and he's putting on really good fucking fights. I mean, one of the best fights I've ever seen, I don't give a fuck what gender it is, was you know what I'm talking about. I ain't even got to say it.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? I don't even have to say it. And that was in the garden. Come on, bro. Like, come on, son. So, as a promoter, I tell people this all the time. I don't hate Jake Paul. I hate what people have crowned him as. Like, people were talking about him before the Tommy Fury fight. People were legitimately saying that this dude could be a cruiserweight champion. Are you shitting me? he loses a clear loss to Tommy Fury, right? Who, let's be clear, Tommy Fury is not a world beater. He's what, 9? He's only got 9 fights himself.
And he still himself is more of an influencer than he is a boxer too. He's not some guy who's
Right.
been boxing his whole life. He was on reality TV shows and has done boxing. He's got a bit of an amateur pedigree, but he's still more closer to that celebrity boxing than he is a world champion too.
But he grew up with boxing. You know, obviously, if you're in the Fury family, you've done some version of it. You know what I'm saying? And he was in there with a guy who knows boxing, who can take punches, right? But he's still green. You know, as green as Tommy Fury was, he put him to work, right? If you think that Jake Paul has a chance to be a world class boxer, he's got years before that happens. You know, plural, very plural years before that happens, right? So I want people to be more realistic about what he is as a boxer. As a promoter, look, he's doing a hell of a fucking job. I'd be honest with you. I'm going to watch because of the fights that are on before his. You know what I mean? If I'm watching by the time his fight comes on still, it's probably because my kids want to see it.
I was just gonna say the question is we know you tune into the undercards, but will your TV be on during the main event or not? I guess is that to be determined still, or
It's entertainment, bro. So it's like I'm gonna watch it because and I fuck with Nate Diaz. Like I like Nate Diaz. You know what I mean? Win, lose, or draw, I like watching that guy fight. So I'm actually kind of interested to see what happens, but I'm not putting any stock into it. I'm not gonna bet on it. You know, let's put it that way. I'm not betting on it. I'm not, oh my God, I can't wait for it. Like if I miss it, I won't be sad. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm someone
Question
who
is, are you watching?
I'm 100% watching it. Yeah, I definitely will. I'm going to a local show tomorrow in Worcester to see my guy Kevin Walsh, who I did an interview with last week, but I think I should be back in time for the main event. But Nate Diaz is somebody who he was the first guy I was actually introduced in any combat sport. My dad was he's been a boxing fan and MMA guy, but the Diaz brothers, especially Nick Diaz, who came on the scene first, and then Nate after that. So Nate was the first guy I was ever a fan of in combat sports, and he's still my favorite combat sports athlete. So for that alone, I'm interested in the fight. I'm happy he's getting the payday that I think he's deserved for a long, long time. He's always kind of wanted to box. But it's just tough because I wonder how serious he's even taking the fight. You see the videos of him. He's hitting pads or he's shadow boxing when he's smoking a joint. It's just like fucking around being Nate Diaz. I'm sure he is in great shape. He's been in the Robert Garcia camp a bit. Mikey Garcia said when they have Esquiva Falcao, who's a middleweight guy who just fought for a middleweight belt in July, they said they brought him in when he was in the prime of his camp and Nate was just starting his camp. And Nate walked in and did 12 rounds of sparring with him. So the one thing I can never doubt is that Nate will be in shape. That's why I think the 10 rounds will be able to help him. I just wonder just that he's at a size disadvantage. He fights at 155 or 170. He's now fighting someone who's going to be 200 pounds fight night. And he's fighting a real boxer. Nate has boxing pedigree. He's been in with Andre Ward and Regis Prograis. But I think until you're out there with no headgear, with those 10-ounce gloves, and Jake is somebody who's very, very limited in his skill set. But the one thing he can do is he can crack. So if Nate's kind of messing around with his hands down, and if he gets caught at some point, anything can happen. So I am picking Jake to probably win the fight, but I sure as hell really, really want Nate to win. It won't affect Nate's legacy. His legacy is set as it is, but I just don't want to see. It sounds crazy for me to say, but it's almost everything wrong with like these things to see a guy like Jake Paul go out and just knock out a Nate Diaz. Like it's just almost not right. I feel probably what's going to happen at the end of the day, but I hope that Nate is able to pull it out. As you see here, Nate is probably going to get KO'd. I think on the Vegas odds, that's the most likely outcome. I think Jake is favored to win, but also to win by knockout too. We see it would actually be good for boxing if a YouTuber fought for a world championship. Really think about it, they would bring exposure to the landscape to the division. He's rooting for sanctioning bodies to give a YouTuber a chance for the exposure of the sport. Rolly's a world champ. It can't be that hard for him to get a YouTuber in the top 15. I think I'll push back on that a little bit. I guess I'll pose a question to you: is the exposure that would come from it worth potentially the undermining of the sport that would come from people saying, "Oh, this guy's a YouTuber who just hopped in the sport"? Like people would say, you can't just be a YouTuber and just join the NBA. You can't join. That's what Nate Diaz has always said about Jake Paul. Like he said, I can't just go join the NFL. I can't go just join Major League Baseball. Like you can't just hop in those sports. So the exposure for a division like cruiserweight would be good for the sport, but I wonder, is it a benefit considering all the I think just the shit that would come with it. The people that don't like boxing would sit there and say, "Oh, you get a guy who's not a boxer who would come in and kind of just to be able to walk into a title shot." So I'm not sure about that. I do think that Rolly is a champion, but Rolly's also, if you were to compare Rolly to Jake Paul, when we talk about Rolly or Isak Cruz or these guys, it's still night and day compared to a Jake Paul level because we're comparing those guys to the highest of highest in boxing. We're comparing them to a Javante Davis, a Shakur Stevenson, those kind of guys. And with Jake, part of the reason why I was actually impressed with the Anderson Silva win is because of where I view Jake Paul. I don't view Jake Paul, which we've always had the same opinion. I've never viewed Jake Paul as someone who is going to be a ranked fighter or a world champion. So when people say, yeah, he beat a 50-year-old Anderson Silva, to me, that's pretty impressive because Jake is somebody who just started boxing a few years ago. And I know Silva is 50 years old. He'd been knocked out in the UFC, but he's somebody who has skills. If he goes in there and knocks out Nate Diaz, even though he's supposed to do that, to me, that's impressive still because of where I view him. And I don't view him, I think, on the same trajectory as other people do. I view him as a guy who's having fun and he's doing everything he can. But I just think that the gap in skill set is going to be too far. See, I think that there is still a very, very big difference because Rolly and Cruz have been in there with the right guys, but so hasn't Jake Paul, too. If Rolly or Cruz are in there with an equivalent to a Tommy Fury at their weight class, they get him out of there. And I guess that's where my difference is, where Jake Paul has been in there with the right guys, too. He's fought, I mean, I love Nate Diaz. He's still fighting Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz has never been in a pro boxing match. He's a very, very skilled with his hands. He's 40 years old. He's past his prime. So as as impressed as I will be just because of where I view Jake Paul, I think we still have to remember where those guys who are the ranked fighters, to me, are still on a whole different level.
Bro, here's what I'll say to this, right? They tried that with Kimbo Slice, right? Everybody remembers Kimbo Slice. He was a YouTube sensation. He was knocking guys out in backyards, right? Bare knuckles. You put him in against professional guys, and look what happened to him. Yeah, he won a couple. But for the most part, once he got in there with guys who were complete fighters, what'd they do? They rolled his ass up, right? His son did the same shit. They rolled his ass up too. And those guys had actually been training in the sport for years before they got, into these promotions, right? Look, man, I know that Jake Paul does actually respect boxing. I know he does train hard, right? But you can't play boxing, right? If you were there's a guy called Destroying who's a big time YouTube guy, kicks field goals on YouTube all the time, went to UCF, right? He can kick a field goal on YouTube 60 yards, but have you seen any NFL team pounding down his door to come kick for them? No. Why? Because there's levels to this game, bro. It's one thing to do it on YouTube. It's a whole nother thing to do it with your pads and other 300-pound men in your face. Jake Paul is great for the sport as far as advertising. But if you put him in there, and again, most people have to Google who the champions are at cruiserweight, right? There's no one in the top 10 in the cruiserweight division that can't beat Jake Paul. Period. There's no one I'm putting money on Jake Paul beating in the top 10 in that division.
Just
right?
imagine him fighting, like, not to cut you off, but just because it'll go to your point, but imagine him fighting Badu Jack, an older guy who's 40 years old and has gone up multiple weight classes. Just imagine that. Even a Zurdo Ramirez, we joke about Zurdo, he's overrated, this and that. Imagine Jake Paul really fighting Zurdo in a real boxing match and how that would go. Like,
bro, look,
like you said, levels to this game.
if they put him in with Badu Jack, that would just be bad business. Like
Mm-hmm.
that would be horrible. And as old as Badu Jack is, right? And as much as most of the younger cats could probably give him the business right now, Badu Jack knocks Jake Paul out if he wants to, right? Because there are times where Badu's just like, all right, let me get my check. If he wanted to, he knocks him out in 2 rounds.
Mm-hmm.
He goes 1 round just to kind of give the guy a thing, and then he puts him to sleep in the second. Like Badu Jack is a world class fighter, bro. And but with all due respect to these YouTube guys who are trying to box, that's great for you, and it is great exposure. But getting them title fights is murder. And anybody who puts them in against world class fighters should be ashamed of themselves. And as excuse me, you alluded to this before. As much as we talk shit about Rolly and Cruz, I'm here to tell you right now, Rolly could beat Jake Paul. Like, look, Rolly has been boxing for years, right? He grew up in the sport. This is the sport he's been training at. He's got a world title. No matter what you think of him, Rolly is a world-class fighter.
Yeah. And even he got a very late start. He started, I think, 17, but he still has a whole decade in the game, which is a whole different from 3 or 4 years. So started late, but to your point, still has a decade of all that muscle memory and all those kind of things.
And before he got caught, was doing very well against Tank. You know what I mean? He probably was giving Tank one of his better fights, in a long time before he got caught slipping. Is he a little chinny? Yeah, but a lot of power punches are. But you could put Rolly in with some guys and he can win. Cruz, again, he's not a world beater, but if he were the same weight, he rolls up Jake Paul. Like let's be real clear, bro. These guys are world class boxers for a reason, and you don't play that. So let's get that out of here. And another thing, to Jake Paul's point, he's actually going backwards. You fought Tommy Fury, your first legitimate boxer, right? And then what do? You go back to fighting MMA guys. You know what I mean? Give me somebody who's actually boxing. I think if I were him, I would have spun the block on the Hasim Rahman situation. You know what I mean? Like, let's see if we can make that happen now. Because to be honest with you, based off of what we saw with Hasim, in his last fight,
against Greg Hardy.
I think Jake Paul didn't need him to cut all that weight. I think you could have fought him at his regular weight and still probably would have won.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah. And even I see right here saying that Rolly isn't all that. I think we agree with you. And even he's saying he knows some things about Rolly. I've heard some things about things that have gone on in the gym too. We've seen some things that have kind of gone on in the gym. I understand there are certain gaps, and there are a lot of fighters who we haven't really heard about that have definitely given him some good work, to say the least, in spots. But I think at the end of the day, we're still kind of comparing. Like we say, there's levels to this game. It's just a whole different. To me, it's like apples to oranges. It's like we're not even comparing. We're giving just two different conversations. And yeah, we know you're not trying to hate. You're just giving your opinion. We're giving our opinion, so there's nothing wrong with that. So yeah.
But here's what you're doing. If you're asking me to compare Rolly's talent level in the ring versus Jake Paul's, Rolly's is again levels above where Jake Paul is. Now, if you're asking me to compare Rolly to other guys in his division, that's a whole different conversation. But for the conversation and the space that we're talking about now, he's levels above where Jake Paul wishes he could get to a Rolly level as far as boxing talent is concerned, right? When you look at that, Jake Paul is not on that level yet. Can he get there? It's possible. He needs to stop fighting fucking YouTubers and MMA guys. Keep fighting the Tommy Furies of the world so you can get better.
Last question here too, and then we'll kind of move on and give our final predictions. But how many levels he said? To me, I think a multiple. I think that still someone like, so Jake Paul lost to someone like Tommy Fury, which I had picked him to win that fight, but I can look back and see now I probably underrated Tommy Fury, been overrated Jake Paul a bit. But Rolly is still not a great fighter, but he still did. He did beat he lost to Jackson Mariñez, but he still went 12 rounds with him. I thought he lost to Jackson Mariñez. He won that fight, but we all know he lost that fight. He beat Anthony Yiggett, who's not a world beater either, but Anthony Yiggett, someone who's fought for a world title. He was an Olympian, and he does have a win over Sandor Martin. And those are the kind of things where Jake Paul, to me, is still so far away from even getting to that level of even fighting somebody at an Anthony Yiggett level who, like I said, not a world beater, but if you're beating somebody who's fought for a world title and somebody who's been an Olympian before and you're able to do what he did against him, that to me just kind of shows the difference. I think there are multiple levels still kind of between those two guys. But another comment from my dad in here saying he still wonders if there's some in-fight drama that affects the outcome or stops the fight mid-fight. I think that's fair too, because we've seen a lot in this build. I think Nate's kind of got fed up with all the bullshit, all the hoopla, all the social media stuff. I know there was somebody kind of giving him shit at the press conference the other day. So he was basically saying, like, get this motherfucker on stage with me right now. It's just being real though. And I think that Nate's one of those guys who he knows he can't do anything stupid before the fight, but I think during the fight or after the fight, if people are saying stuff to him, we've seen he'll slap someone, he'll choke you out on the street. Like, he's someone who's really about that action. I think a lot of people talk like they're about that action, especially in this social media era. And they find out at the end of the day that a lot of people are about it at the end of the day. So it'll be interesting to see. So we'll say final predictions. So I think I will. So I'm going to pick, I think Serrano will beat Heather Hardy by a decision, probably a shutout kind of decision, but I'm happy that they both get the payday, especially Heather Hardy on her way out in her 40s, getting one more big payday. Shadasia Green, that's a bad woman right there. Maybe the baddest woman on the planet, most intimidating woman on the planet in boxing. I think she's going to score a huge knockout, which would be really, really big for her. And then it kills me to say it, but I will pick Jake Paul to knock out Nate Diaz at some point in the mid-rounds. I think Nate will kind of just slap his way around. He'll kind of have success with his volume, but I think all it takes is Jake to time him up one time good where he's kind of catching him slipping, and I think he does at some point. But what do you kind of think of? What are your final predictions before we wrap this up?
I think we're on the same page as far when it comes to Shadasia and Amanda. I think Shadasia is just levels above the person she's fighting. I don't even know the girl's name, to be honest with you. I think Shadasia wins out by a spectacular knockout. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Serrano stops Hardy late.
I was thinking that too.
Yeah, I think it's either a absolute dominating, performance, or maybe her corner throws in the towel because she's taking too much punishment, kind of thing. Later on, Serrano, to me, I have her a lot. I got her as my number 2 pound for pound woman. Period. I know a lot of people think that's ridiculous, but I look at her complete resume, not just these recent fights. And again, when you talk about pound for pound, there's nobody in the women's division who's done it better than her. She's literally a pound for pound champion. I don't give a shit enough about the Nate Diaz and okay. Yes, is Nate Diaz being served up as a former over-the-hill MMA fighter for Jake Paul? He is. But I want to give people context here. Nate's been boxing for years, right? A lot of the issues he had with the UFC and why you didn't see him fighting in so many spurts is because he wanted permission to box, right? He wanted to box and and they wouldn't let him do it. He's been in boxing gyms. So that's the intrigue here for me, if there is any. Maybe he can give him fits, but I'm expecting that right hand to find its home. And I think Jake Paul, because again, he's the machine. He'll win, even if Nate Diaz is winning the fight. I think he'll kind of like I felt like the first Woodley fight. I thought Woodley won the first time that he fought Jake Paul, and they give it to him because he's Jake Paul. I think the same thing will happen here. I think even if Nate Diaz does enough, and he gets through the rounds, even if he's doing enough to win the fight, I think they'll give it to Jake Paul anyway. So Jake Paul's either knocking him out or he's getting a decision. So that's why I don't really give too much stock into it.
Yeah, that's my one worry is that with Nate, he's never had the one punch knockout power. Even in the forearms, because he's always been an accumulation, wear you down guys. So he will be in great shape. It's a 10-round fight. Another kind of underlying thing is two things is that I know that Jake Paul's no longer with BJ Flores. I think Sugar Shane Mosley's his trainer now, which it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic works. That kind of surprised me when I saw that. And then he's also working with Coach Larry Wade, who's one of the best strength and conditioning people in boxing. He worked there with Sean Porter a lot. He helped out Robesi Ramirez. He turned Robesi into this guy we've seen him too. So Jake's had the tendency to fade late in fights. And that's Nate's recipe for a win, I think, is to kind of hope that Jake fades a bit. You can kind of take him out late or kind of really put it on him late. I think with Larry Wade and the strength and conditioning and his confidence in going 10 rounds, I'd have to favor Jake in this. But so
I will say this: he does look like he's in much better shape.
mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I will say this: he does look like he's in much better shape. If he's training with Shane and them, then he's got a little bit more respect for me because I think Shane Mosley is he's up here for me.
Mm-hmm.
The BJ Flores thing, I thought that was kind of a novelty anyway,
mm-hmm.
if I'm being clear. BJ, good boxer in his own right, but I don't know if he's got anybody else worth mentioning as far as fighters in his camp that he's training there or anything like that. So, but you can't go wrong with a Hall of Famer, in your corner. So we'll see what happens. But again, it's people are going to watch because it's Jake Paul. They're going to tune in, and if he wins and he wins in spectacular fashion, they're going to give him way more credit than he deserves.
Yeah. As you know, so that's always how it goes. But we got a question: when is our next live? So we were just talking about it pre-show. So I have a fight I'm going to, which we'll talk about next week also. But Michael Hahn Jr. against Harry Gigliotti. It's a big New England fight. Dakota knows Harry. I know Mike pretty well, so it's a cool one. So that's next Friday night. So we will not be on Friday night, so we will be on Saturday. The time is to be determined yet, but on our Instagram at ITR Boxing, or my Instagram is jack.kelly.82, or even my Twitter, which is jackkelly_18. We'll have updates, so you can hit me up or hit us up on any of those platforms there, and we'll have information. And we'll share with you guys if you have notifications on for our channel here. It'll let you guys know, but probably a Saturday stream at some point in the afternoon, but we'll have to let you guys know. So we appreciate you tuning in. And as he says there too, the Diaz brothers really do box. Andre Ward isn't someone he's not a bullshitter. If he didn't think Nate could box, he wouldn't vouch for him like that. So at the end of the day, it'll be interesting to see what's left of Nate Diaz, and I guess what comes from it from Jake Paul. But I hope that Nate wins the fight, but we shall see what happens. We know how the game goes, though. Jake Paul will most likely win, but it happens. It's boxing. So thank you all for tuning in once again. It was a great show. We appreciate everybody tuning in, all the comments we have, all the growing viewership that we have. We will see y'all next week. So Nibs, always a pleasure, my guy. And we'll see y'all, everyone, next week.
All right, fam. See you next week, babe.
All righty. Peace out, everyone.